Welcome, dear listener, to a quiet journey beyond the familiar halls of Hogwarts into the wider world of magical education that exists just out of view. Tonight, we will gently trace what became of the other wizarding schools during the years when Harry Potter attended Hogwarts. While much attention rests on events in Britain, the magical world has always extended far beyond its borders, shaped by distant traditions, hidden institutions, and students living lives untouched by those conflicts. So settle into stillness and let the story carry you outward, away from Hogwarts, and into the quiet continuity of the wider magical world. The structure of magical education has never been confined to a single place, nor shaped by a single authority. Long before Hogwarts became widely known, systems of teaching had already taken root across the world, each developing according to its own traditions, environment, and cultural priorities. By the time Harry Potter entered his first year, there were 11 long-established wizarding schools formally recognized by the international magical community, though many smaller institutions and informal methods of education existed beyond that number. Instead, they reflected the regions that sustained them, adapting magic to local conditions rather than forcing it into a rigid global standard. In Europe, schools such as Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang shared a loose familiarity with one another, shaped by centuries of contact, competition, and occasional cooperation. Their students learned many of the same foundational disciplines, including charms, transfiguration, and potion making. Yet even among these institutions, differences in philosophy were noticeable. Some emphasized discipline and tradition, while others encouraged experimentation and independent thought. These variations were not considered flaws, but natural outcomes of history and geography. Outside of Europe, the structure became more distinct. Ilvermorny in North America developed within a society that had separated itself early from European magical governance. Its approach to education carried traces of that independence, blending inherited traditions with new practices that emerged over time. Castelobruxo in South America focused heavily on magical flora and fauna, shaped by the dense and complex ecosystems surrounding it. Students there grew accustomed to a form of learning that relied not only on spells, but on observation and interaction with the natural world. In Africa, Uagadu stood apart even further, as a place where wandless magic was not an exception, but a standard method of practice, taught and refined from an early age. These differences were not accidental. They were the result of centuries of separation, where magical communities evolved according to their own needs, often with little direct interference from others. The International Confederation of Wizards provided a framework for recognition and communication, but it did not impose strict control over how each school functioned. Its role was more observational than authoritative, ensuring that certain broad principles were upheld, particularly those related to secrecy and the protection of magical society as a whole. The Statute of Secrecy, established to protect wizarding communities from non-magical discovery, influenced education in every region. Schools were often placed in locations that offered natural concealment, whether through isolation, enchantment, or simple obscurity. This separation had the unintended effect of reinforcing cultural independence. Students grew up within systems that felt complete in themselves, rarely needing to look beyond their own traditions to understand the world. As a result, while all magical schools shared a common purpose to educate young witches and wizards, they did not necessarily share a common perspective. Communication between schools existed, but it was limited. Events such as the Tri-Wizard Tournament were rare, and long periods could pass without direct contact between institutions. Most students would complete their entire education without ever meeting peers from other countries. Knowledge of foreign schools was often secondhand, passed down through books or the occasional traveling wizard. This distance created a sense of quiet parallel existence, where each school functioned as its own contained world. Within these worlds, The daily structure of education followed patterns that were both familiar and distinct. Students were typically admitted at a young age, when their magical abilities began to manifest more clearly. Instruction combined practical spellwork with theoretical study, though the balance between the two varied widely. Some schools placed strong emphasis on discipline and repetition, ensuring that spells were performed with precision and control. Others encouraged exploration, allowing students to experiment and discover new applications of magic for themselves. Authority within each school rested primarily with its headmaster or headmistress, whose influence often shaped the institution's identity. These figures were not merely administrators, but central guiding forces, responsible for maintaining both academic standards and the safety of their students. In some cases, their philosophies extended far beyond the classroom, influencing how entire generations of witches and wizards understood their place in the magical world. Despite these variations, there remained a quiet consistency across all schools. Each served as a place of transition, where children learned to manage abilities that had once appeared unpredictable or uncontrolled. Magic, in its earliest stages, could be erratic, responding more to emotion than intention. Education provided structure, transforming that raw potential into something stable and reliable. This process, though universal, was shaped differently depending on where it occurred. There were also those who existed outside these formal systems. Not every magical child attended a recognized school. Some were taught at home, guided by family members or local practitioners. Others learned through informal communities that passed knowledge down through generations. These paths were less visible, but no less real, forming a quiet network of education that operated alongside the official institutions. The existence of such alternatives further reinforced the idea that magical learning was not confined to any single structure. By the time events at Hogwarts began to draw wider attention, this global system had already been in place for centuries. It functioned without central coordination, yet maintained a form of balance through shared understanding rather than imposed control. Each school continued its work, largely unaffected by distant events, focused on its own students, its own traditions, and its own rhythm of life. The world of magical education, vast and varied, did not revolve around one castle in Scotland. It extended far beyond it, into forests, mountains, and hidden valleys, into places where the passage of time felt slower and the influence of external events was often muted. And within these places, students continued to learn, to practice, and to grow, unaware that their experiences were part of a much larger, quietly interconnected system that spanned the entire magical world. The years before Harry Potter's arrival at Hogwarts unfolded with a quiet consistency across most of the magical world, shaped more by routine than by disruption. While Britain carried the lingering memory of Voldemort's first rise and fall, many other regions experienced these events only as distant developments, observed rather than felt. For students attending magical schools outside the United Kingdom, daily life followed patterns that had been established long before his name became widely known. Education during this period was defined by stability. Classes were conducted according to long-standing traditions, with lessons progressing through familiar sequences of theory and practice. Young witches and wizards learned to control their abilities in measured steps, guided by instructors who relied on methods refined over generations. There was little sense that the world beyond their classrooms was undergoing any significant change. Even in places where news from Britain reached them, it arrived slowly and often without urgency, filtered through official channels that emphasized caution rather than alarm. In Beauxbatons, students moved through their studies with an emphasis on elegance and precision, their work reflecting a cultural preference for refinement in both spellwork and conduct. Lessons were structured, but not rigid, allowing for creativity within established boundaries. Teachers encouraged a sense of composure, reinforcing the idea that magic should be performed with control rather than force. The atmosphere remained calm, even as occasional reports from across the channel hinted at unrest that seemed unlikely to cross into their own experience. At Durmstrang, the environment carried a different tone, shaped by its long-standing reputation for discipline and secrecy. Students there were accustomed to a more austere form of education, where independence was expected and emotional restraint was valued. While the school's approach to certain branches of magic differed from that of its European counterparts, daily life remained consistent. Whatever rumors circulated about events in Britain were absorbed into the background, treated as matters of interest rather than immediate concern. Farther away, Ilvermorny continued to operate within its own distinct framework, shaped by the history of magical communities in North America. The school's traditions emphasized balance, drawing from both European influences and local practices that had evolved independently. Students attended lessons, formed friendships, and progressed through their education without disruption. The conflicts that had defined parts of Europe were not absent from awareness, but they did not alter the structure of life within the school. In South America, Castelobruxo existed within an environment that demanded a different kind of attention. Surrounded by dense rainforest, the school's curriculum naturally incorporated the study of magical creatures and plant life, encouraging students to engage directly with their surroundings. The outside world, particularly events occurring across oceans, felt distant in both geography and significance. Education continued without interruption, shaped by the rhythms of the land rather than the movements of political conflict. Uagadu, with its emphasis on wandless magic, offered yet another variation of stability. Students there learned to channel magic through intention and discipline, developing skills that did not rely on tools but on personal mastery. This approach fostered a sense of independence that extended beyond the classroom. News from other parts of the world was acknowledged, but it did not redefine the priorities of the institution. The focus remained on the development of each student's abilities within a framework that had endured for centuries. Mahoutokoro, located far from European centers of influence, maintained a structured and disciplined environment where progress was measured carefully over time. Students advanced through clearly defined stages, their achievements marked not only by academic success, but by their ability to demonstrate responsibility and control. The distance from Britain allowed the school to continue its routines without interruption, even as the wider magical world began to shift in subtle ways. Across all these institutions, there was a shared understanding that education required consistency. Students depended on the predictability of their environment, on the steady progression of lessons, and the reliability of their teachers. This stability was not accidental. It was maintained deliberately, protected from external influence to ensure that each generation could develop its abilities without unnecessary disruption. The ministries of magic in various countries contributed to this sense of continuity by managing the flow of information. While they monitored developments abroad, they often chose to limit what was communicated to schools, especially when the details carried the potential to cause concern. This approach was not intended to conceal the truth entirely, but to present it in a way that preserved order. Students were informed, but not burdened with the full weight of events that did not directly affect them. For most young witches and wizards, the years leading up to Harry Potter's time at Hogwarts were defined by personal milestones rather than global events. They focused on mastering spells, preparing for examinations, and navigating the complexities of growing up within a magical community. Friendships formed and changed. Rivalries emerged and faded, and the passage of time was marked by the steady rhythm of academic life. Even in Britain, where the memory of Voldemort's actions lingered more strongly, there was a gradual return to normalcy. The absence of immediate threat allowed institutions like Hogwarts to resume their traditional roles, providing education without the constant presence of fear. For those outside the country, this return was even more pronounced, as their experience had never been deeply disrupted to begin with. The magical world, in this period, functioned as a collection of interconnected but largely independent systems. Each school maintained its own identity, its own traditions, and its own pace of life. While events in one region could influence another, such influence was rarely immediate or overwhelming. Instead, it moved slowly, carried by communication that respected distance and difference. This quiet continuity allowed magical education to endure without interruption. Students graduated, new students arrived, and the cycle repeated itself with little deviation. The world beyond their classrooms may have been shifting in ways they could not fully see, but within the walls of their schools, life remained steady, guided by routines that had proven reliable over time. In this way, the years before Harry Potter's story became widely known were not defined by conflict for most of the wizarding world. They were defined by stability, by the ongoing work of teaching and learning, and by the quiet assurance that, for now, the structures that supported magical life remained intact. The first rise of Voldemort did not unfold as a global event, but as something more contained, rooted primarily within the boundaries of Britain. While its effects were profound for those who lived through it, the wider magical world experienced it at a distance, observing its development without becoming directly involved. For many schools outside the United Kingdom, the war existed as a series of reports, fragments of information that arrived slowly and often without the immediacy that might have altered their daily routines. At the time, communication between magical governments was steady but measured. Ministries maintained contact through established diplomatic channels, sharing information when necessary, but avoiding the spread of panic. Reports of a dark wizard gaining followers in Britain were taken seriously. Yet, they were not immediately seen as a threat that would extend beyond national borders. Each region had its own concerns, its own systems of governance, and its own understanding of risk. What was happening in Britain was significant, but it was also specific, shaped by local conditions that did not easily translate to other parts of the world. Within the walls of magical schools, life continued with little visible change. Students attended lessons, completed their studies, and moved through the structured progression of their education. Professors remained focused on teaching, ensuring that knowledge was passed on without interruption. While some may have been aware of the growing unrest, it did not dominate conversation or alter the rhythm of daily life. For most, it remained something external, a situation unfolding elsewhere, observed but not experienced. In Beauxbatons, awareness of the conflict was present but subdued. The proximity to Britain meant that news arrived with relative regularity, yet it was filtered through a perspective that emphasized stability. The school's leadership maintained a careful balance, acknowledging the situation without allowing it to disrupt the educational environment. Students may have heard names spoken in passing, references to disappearances or conflicts, but these details remained abstract, lacking the immediacy that would make them part of personal experience. Durmstrang, with its more insular structure, approached the situation differently. Information from outside was often treated with a degree of skepticism, evaluated through the lens of the school's own traditions and priorities. The existence of a powerful wizard seeking influence was not, in itself, a new concept. Such figures had appeared throughout history, rising and falling without necessarily reshaping the entire magical world. For many within the institution, Voldemort's rise was seen as another instance of this pattern, notable but not unprecedented. Further away, the sense of distance became even more pronounced. At Ilvermorny, the conflict in Britain was acknowledged as a matter of interest, but not one that required immediate concern. The North American magical community had developed its own systems of governance, its own approach to maintaining secrecy, and its own understanding of stability. While the actions of a European dark wizard were not ignored, they did not disrupt the functioning of the school or the broader society in which it existed. In South America, Castelobruxo remained largely untouched by the events unfolding across the Atlantic. The geographical distance created a natural barrier, both physical and psychological, that limited the impact of foreign conflicts. Students there continued their studies in an environment shaped by the surrounding rainforest, their attention directed toward the practical application of magic in a complex natural world. The idea of a distant war, carried through second-hand accounts, did not alter the immediate realities of their education. Uagadu, with its emphasis on internal development and wandless magic, maintained a similar sense of continuity. The school's structure was deeply rooted in local tradition, and its approach to teaching was not easily influenced by external events. While information about the conflict in Britain may have reached its instructors, it did not redefine their priorities. The focus remained on the cultivation of skill and discipline, ensuring that students developed the abilities necessary to navigate their own environment. Mahoutokoro, distant both geographically and culturally, continued to operate according to its established systems. The discipline and structure that defined the school allowed it to absorb external information without disruption. Reports of instability in Europe were noted, but they did not translate into immediate action. Students progressed through their studies as they always had, guided by traditions that emphasized control, responsibility, and gradual advancement. Across all these institutions, there was a shared tendency to interpret the conflict as localized rather than global. Voldemort's influence, while significant within Britain, did not extend easily into other regions. His power was built on networks that were largely confined to a specific cultural and political context. Without direct connections to those networks, other schools remained outside the immediate sphere of his reach. This separation was reinforced by the nature of magical society itself. Unlike the non-magical world, where events in one country could quickly influence another, the wizarding world operated through a series of loosely connected communities. Travel, communication, and governance were all shaped by traditions that favored independence. As a result, conflicts did not always spread beyond their point of origin. They remained contained, their impact limited by the boundaries that defined each region. For students growing up during this time, the war was something they heard about rather than something they lived through. It existed in conversations between adults, in occasional mentions during lessons, in the subtle shifts of tone that suggested concern without revealing its full extent. It did not dominate their thoughts or alter their expectations of the future. Their education continued, steady and uninterrupted, shaped by the same patterns that had guided previous generations. Even within Britain, there were periods when the conflict seemed distant. Its presence felt more through uncertainty than through constant action. Outside the country, that sense of distance was even greater. The war, though real and consequential, did not define the experience of most magical students around the world. It remained one part of a larger, more complex system, where life continued according to its own rhythms. In this way, the First Wizarding War did not disrupt the global structure of magical education. It existed alongside it, observed from afar, acknowledged but not allowed to interfere with the ongoing work of teaching and learning. Schools remained places of continuity, where the passage of time was marked not by conflict, but by the steady progression of knowledge from one generation to the next. Beauxbatons' Academy of Magic existed within a setting that seemed deliberately removed from disruption, both in its physical location and in the traditions that shaped its identity. Situated somewhere within the French Pyrenees, concealed by enchantments that blended elegance with concealment, the school had long been known for its emphasis on refinement, discipline, and a particular attention to the presentation of magic. By the time of the First Wizarding War in Britain, Beauxbatons had already established itself as an institution where stability was not only maintained, but quietly expected. Students arrived at Beauxbatons from across parts of Western Europe, bringing with them a variety of cultural backgrounds that were gradually shaped into a shared understanding of magical conduct. The environment encouraged composure, reinforcing the idea that magic should be controlled, measured, and deliberate. Lessons were conducted with a sense of structure that allowed for creativity, but always within defined boundaries. This approach created an atmosphere where change was absorbed slowly, rather than allowed to disrupt the established rhythm of education. During the years of Voldemort's first rise, this rhythm remained largely intact. Information about events in Britain reached the school through official channels, carried by the French Ministry of Magic, and filtered through a perspective that emphasized caution rather than urgency. Reports of disappearances, of conflict, and of a dark wizard gathering influence were acknowledged, but they did not alter the daily structure of life within the academy. Students continued to attend lessons, to complete their studies, and to progress through their education without interruption. There was an awareness, particularly among older students and faculty, that something significant was unfolding beyond their borders. Conversations in quieter spaces sometimes reflected this understanding, though rarely in a way that created visible concern. The distance between Beauxbatons and Britain, both geographical and cultural, allowed events to be interpreted as external rather than immediate. The war, while serious, was perceived as belonging to another place, shaped by circumstances that did not fully extend into their own experience. The leadership of Beauxbatons played a central role in maintaining this sense of continuity. The headmistress, supported by a structured faculty, ensured that the school remained focused on its primary purpose. Education was not allowed to become secondary to speculation or fear. Instead, there was a deliberate effort to preserve the environment as a place of learning, where students could develop their abilities without the distraction of distant conflict. This approach did not deny the existence of the war, but it placed it within a context that prevented it from dominating the institution. Students at Beauxbatons experienced these years in a way that was shaped more by personal development than by global events. They formed friendships, navigated rivalries, and advanced through their studies with the same steady progression that had defined previous generations. Magical disciplines were taught with an emphasis on precision, encouraging students to refine their techniques and to understand the underlying principles of their work. This focus on mastery created a sense of purpose that remained consistent even as the wider world began to shift in subtle ways. The architecture and environment of the academy contributed to this feeling of continuity. The chateau, with its expansive grounds and carefully maintained gardens, provided a setting that felt both timeless and controlled. Seasonal changes marked the passage of time more clearly than any external news. Winter brought a quiet stillness, while spring and summer encouraged outdoor study and exploration. Beauxbatons existed within its own contained world, one that was not easily disrupted by events beyond its borders. Interactions with other schools during this period were limited. The absence of large-scale international events meant that students had few opportunities to engage directly with their peers from different regions. Knowledge of other institutions remained largely theoretical, drawn from books or occasional correspondence. This lack of direct contact further reinforced the perception that each school operated within its own sphere, connected to others in principle but not in daily experience. Despite this separation, there were subtle ways in which the war influenced the academy. Protective measures were reviewed and, in some cases, strengthened, though these changes were implemented quietly and without explanation to the student body. Faculty members remained attentive to developments abroad, ensuring that the school would not be caught unprepared should circumstances change. These precautions existed beneath the surface, part of an underlying awareness that did not disrupt the visible calm of the institution. For the majority of students, however, these precautions were invisible. Their understanding of the world remained centered on their immediate surroundings, shaped by the lessons they attended and the relationships they formed. The war in Britain, while acknowledged, did not define their experience. It existed as a distant narrative, one that might be discussed in passing, but rarely felt as part of their own lives. In this way, Beauxbatons continued to function as it always had, maintaining its traditions and preserving its approach to magical education. The years of conflict elsewhere did not alter its core identity. Instead, they passed alongside it, observed but not absorbed, allowing the academy to remain a place where learning proceeded without interruption. The students who graduated during this time carried with them an understanding of the world that reflected this distance. They were aware of the events that had taken place, but their own experiences had been shaped by stability rather than disruption. Their education had prepared them not only in the practice of magic, but in the ability to maintain composure in the face of uncertainty, to continue forward even when the wider world appeared unsettled. Beauxbatons, in these years, stood as an example of how magical institutions could endure without being overtaken by external conflict. It did not isolate itself completely, nor did it ignore the reality of what was happening beyond its borders. Instead, it maintained a balance, acknowledging the world while preserving the conditions necessary for education to continue. And so, while Britain grappled with a war that would leave lasting marks on its society, Beauxbatons remained steady, its halls filled with the quiet continuity of learning, its students moving forward through time with a sense of calm that reflected the traditions of the school itself. Durmstrang Institute existed within a part of the magical world that had long favored distance, both in geography and in philosophy. Its exact location was never widely shared, though it was understood to lie somewhere in the far north of Europe, in a region shaped by cold climates and long periods of darkness. This isolation was not simply practical, but intentional. The school had developed a reputation over centuries as a place where privacy was valued and where certain branches of magic were approached with fewer restrictions than in other institutions. By the time of Voldemort's first rise in Britain, Durmstrang was already known for its distinct character. Its curriculum differed in emphasis, placing greater focus on discipline, endurance, and a willingness to engage with forms of magic that other schools treated with caution. This did not mean that all students were encouraged toward darker practices, but it did create an environment where the boundaries between acceptable and forbidden magic were less rigidly defined. Within this context, discussions about power were often framed in practical terms rather than moral ones. Life at Durmstrang followed a structure that reflected these priorities. Students were expected to develop independence early, learning not only how to perform magic, but how to manage themselves within a demanding environment. Instruction was direct, sometimes severe, with an expectation that students would adapt rather than be guided gently. This approach created a sense of resilience, but also a form of emotional restraint that shaped how students responded to events beyond the school. When reports of Voldemort's growing influence began to circulate, they were received within this framework. The idea of a powerful wizard seeking to expand his control was not unfamiliar. History had recorded similar figures, and Durmstrang's own traditions did not shy away from acknowledging their existence. As a result, the news was not met with alarm so much as with measured interest. Students and faculty recognized the significance of what was occurring, but they did not immediately interpret it as a direct threat to their own institution. There were, however, elements of Voldemort's ideology that resonated uneasily with certain aspects of Durmstrang's reputation. His emphasis on blood purity, while not universally accepted within the school, found echoes in older attitudes that had persisted in parts of European magical society. These ideas were not dominant within the institution, but neither were they entirely absent. The result was a quiet tension, where some viewed his rise as a reflection of beliefs they had encountered before, while others saw it as a dangerous distortion of those same ideas. The presence of figures such as Igor Karkaroff, who would later become associated with both Durmstrang and Voldemort's followers, illustrates this complexity. Individuals within the school could be drawn toward external movements, influenced by personal ambition or belief, but this did not define the institution as a whole. Durmstrang itself remained focused on its primary function as a place of education, even as some of its members engaged with the broader currents of the magical world. Within the school, daily life continued with little outward change. Lessons were conducted as they always had been, with an emphasis on precision and control. Students practiced spells in environments that demanded focus, often under conditions that tested their endurance. The cold climate, both literal and symbolic, reinforced a sense of discipline that extended beyond the classroom. This consistency provided a form of stability, allowing the institution to maintain its identity regardless of external developments. Communication with other magical communities remained limited, as was typical for Durmstrang. The school's preference for secrecy meant that it did not engage openly with international institutions. Information about the war in Britain reached it through indirect channels, often delayed and lacking in detail. This further contributed to the perception that the conflict was distant, something to be observed rather than experienced. Among the students, awareness of Voldemort's actions varied. Some followed the developments with curiosity, discussing them in quiet conversations that reflected their own interpretations. Others paid little attention, focusing instead on the immediate demands of their education. The environment did not encourage emotional response to distant events, and so the war remained largely abstract, its implications not fully realized within the daily experience of those at the school. The leadership of Durmstrang maintained a careful balance during this period. While the institution did not openly oppose or support movements beyond its borders, it ensured that its internal structure remained intact. Authority was exercised in a way that preserved order, preventing external influences from disrupting the educational process. This approach allowed the school to continue functioning without becoming entangled in conflicts that did not directly involve it. Despite this outward stability, the presence of a figure like Voldemort introduced questions that lingered beneath the surface. The idea of power, already a central theme within Durmstrang's philosophy, took on new dimensions when considered in light of his actions. Students and instructors alike were aware that the use of magic carried consequences, and that the pursuit of influence could lead to outcomes that extended far beyond individual intent. These considerations did not dominate the curriculum, but they existed as an undercurrent, shaping how certain subjects were approached. The war itself did not reach the walls of Durmstrang. There were no direct attacks, no visible disruptions to the structure of the school. Instead, its impact was subtle, reflected in the gradual awareness that the magical world beyond its borders was undergoing change. This awareness did not alter the institution's course, but it did contribute to a broader understanding that isolation, while protective, was not absolute. Students who graduated during this period carried with them an education shaped by both tradition and quiet observation. They had developed their abilities within an environment that valued strength and independence, and they had done so without direct exposure to the conflict that defined Britain. Their perspective on the war was therefore different, informed by distance and interpretation rather than personal experience. Durmstrang, in these years, remained what it had long been, a place defined by its own internal logic, operating according to principles that did not depend on external validation. The rise of Voldemort, while significant in the broader history of the magical world, did not redefine the institution. It existed alongside it, acknowledged but not absorbed, allowing the school to continue its work without interruption. In this way, Durmstrang demonstrated how a magical institution could maintain continuity even in the presence of external upheaval. Its isolation, both physical and philosophical, allowed it to observe events without being drawn into them, preserving a sense of stability that reflected its long-established traditions. Ilvermorny's school of witchcraft and wizardry developed within a setting that was both connected to and separate from the traditions of European magic. Founded centuries after institutions like Hogwarts and Beauxbatons, it carried influences from those earlier schools while adapting to the unique conditions of North America. By the time of Voldemort's first rise in Britain, Ilvermorny had long established its own identity, shaped by independence, diversity, and a deliberate distance from the structures that governed European magical society. Located atop Mount Greylock in Massachusetts, concealed by enchantments that blended with the surrounding landscape, The school existed within a region where magical and non-magical communities had evolved in close proximity. This proximity required a careful balance, reinforced by the American approach to the Statute of Secrecy, which emphasized strict separation between magical and non-magical worlds. As a result, Ilvermorny operated within a system that valued order and caution, ensuring that its students were trained not only in magic, but in the discipline required to remain unseen. The structure of education at Ilvermorny reflected this balance. Students were sorted into houses that emphasized different qualities. Though the system differed in tone from its European counterpart, there was less emphasis on rivalry and more on personal development, encouraging students to explore their strengths without being confined by rigid expectations. Lessons were conducted with a focus on both theory and practice, blending traditional spellwork with approaches that had emerged from the diverse magical cultures of the region. During the years leading up to Harry Potter's time at Hogwarts, Ilvermorny experienced a period of relative stability. News of Voldemort's rise in Britain reached North America through official channels, carried by the Magical Congress of the United States of America, which monitored developments abroad with a measured and cautious approach. Reports of conflict were taken seriously, but they were not interpreted as an immediate threat to the American magical community. The distance between the two regions, both physical and political, created a sense of separation that allowed Ilvermorny to continue its operations without disruption. Within the school, daily life followed a steady and predictable rhythm. Students attended lessons, practiced spells, and progressed through their education with a focus on mastery and control. Professors maintained their courses with little alteration, ensuring that the curriculum remained consistent even as the wider world began to shift. While some instructors may have been aware of the growing unrest in Europe, they did not allow it to interfere with their responsibility. The classroom remained a place of learning, not a reflection of distant conflict. Among the students, awareness of Voldemort's actions varied. Older students, particularly those with family connections to Europe, may have followed the developments with interest, discussing them in quiet conversations that reflected curiosity rather than concern. For younger students, the war existed as something abstract, a series of events that did not directly affect their lives. Their focus remained on their studies, on the challenges of learning magic, and on the relationships they formed within the school. The leadership of Ilvermorny played a key role in maintaining this sense of continuity. The headmaster and faculty ensured that the institution remained insulated from external disruptions, reinforcing the idea that education required stability. Protective measures were reviewed as a precaution, though these changes were implemented quietly, without drawing attention to the reasons behind them. This approach allowed the school to prepare for potential risks without altering the environment experienced by its students. Ilvermorny's independence from European magical governance further reinforced its stability during this period. While it maintained communication with international bodies, it was not directly influenced by the decisions or conflicts that shaped British magical society. The Magical Congress of the United States operated according to its own priorities, focusing on the security and organization of its own community. This autonomy allowed Ilvermorny to function without becoming entangled in events that were unfolding across the Atlantic. The cultural diversity within the school also contributed to its resilience. Students came from a wide range of backgrounds, bringing with them different perspectives on magic and its role in society. This diversity created an environment where ideas could be exchanged and adapted rather than imposed. It also meant that no single narrative dominated the understanding of global events. Voldemort's rise was interpreted in different ways, depending on the experiences and beliefs of those discussing it, further reducing its immediate impact on the school as a whole. Despite this distance, there remained an underlying awareness that the magical world was interconnected. The actions of a powerful wizard in one region could have consequences that extended beyond its borders, even if those consequences were not immediately visible. This awareness did not disrupt daily life at Ilvermorny, but it did contribute to a broader understanding that stability was not guaranteed and that vigilance was necessary, even in times of apparent calm. For most students, however, these considerations remained in the background. Their experience of Ilvermorny was shaped by the structure of their education, by the lessons they attended, and by the relationships they built over time. The school provided a space where they could develop their abilities in a controlled and supportive environment, largely unaffected by the conflicts that defined other parts of the world. As the years passed and Voldemort's influence grew within Britain, Ilvermorny continued to operate according to its established patterns. The war remained distant, its presence felt only through the occasional report or conversation. The institution did not ignore these developments, but neither did it allow them to redefine its purpose. Education remained the central focus, guiding each new generation of students through the process of learning and growth. In this way, Ilvermorny demonstrated how a magical school could maintain continuity even as the wider world experienced disruption. Its independence, combined with its emphasis on structure and discipline, allowed it to remain steady, preserving the conditions necessary for education to continue. The students who passed through its halls during this time carried with them an understanding of the world that was shaped more by stability than by conflict, reflecting the environment in which they had been trained. The rise of Voldemort, while significant in the history of the magical world, did not alter the fundamental nature of Ilvermorny. It remained what it had always been, a place of learning, guided by its own traditions, operating within a system that valued independence and control. And within its walls, life continued, steady and uninterrupted, as students learned to shape their magic in ways that would define their futures. Castelobruxo existed within a setting that shaped its identity in ways that differed from most other wizarding schools. Hidden deep within the Amazon rainforest, the school was surrounded by an environment that demanded attention, patience, and a careful understanding of the natural world. Its location was not chosen simply for concealment, though that was certainly a factor, but because the region itself offered a form of magical richness that could not be replicated elsewhere. By the time Voldemort began to rise in Britain, Castelobruxo had long developed an approach to education that was deeply connected to its surroundings, emphasizing knowledge that extended beyond structured spellwork. The school itself appeared as a golden structure, often described as a temple rather than a traditional castle, blending into the dense greenery that surrounded it. Protective enchantments ensured that it remained hidden, not only from non-magical observers, but from those who did not belong within its grounds. Students arriving at Castelobruxo entered an environment that felt both expansive and enclosed, where the boundaries of the school were defined less by walls and more by the vastness of the forest itself. Education at Castelobruxo reflected this environment. While students learned the standard branches of magic, including charms and transfiguration, there was a particular emphasis on magical botany and magizoology. The rainforest provided a living classroom, filled with plants and creatures that required direct interaction rather than distant study. Lessons often extended beyond indoor spaces, with students guided through areas where observation and experience became central to their understanding. This approach fostered a form of learning that was steady and immersive, shaped by the rhythms of the natural world rather than the pressures of external events. During the years of Voldemort's first rise, this rhythm remained largely unchanged. News of conflict in Britain reached Castelobruxo slowly, carried across great distances through official magical channels. By the time such information arrived, it had already lost much of its immediacy. Reports of a dark wizard gathering influence were acknowledged by faculty and, to some extent, by older students. But they did not alter the structure of daily life within the school. The war existed as something distant, both geographically and conceptually, far removed from the realities of the rainforest. The leadership of Castelobruxo maintained a focus on continuity, ensuring that education proceeded without disruption. Protective measures were part of the school's foundation, shaped by the need to exist within a vast and unpredictable environment. These measures did not require significant adjustment in response to events abroad, as the school was already designed to operate independently of external influence. This independence allowed it to maintain stability even as other regions began to experience uncertainty. Students at Castelobruxo experienced these years in a way that was defined more by their immediate surroundings than by distant conflicts. Their days were structured around lessons that required attention to detail, patience, and a willingness to engage directly with the world around them. They learned to identify magical plants, to understand their properties, and to use them responsibly. They studied creatures that were both familiar and unfamiliar, developing skills that depended on observation and adaptability. These experiences created a sense of connection to their environment that remained central to their education. Awareness of Voldemort's actions, while present, did not dominate conversation. It existed as a narrative that unfolded elsewhere, discussed occasionally but rarely explored in depth. The distance between Castelobruxo and Europe, both in terms of geography and cultural focus, allowed the school to continue functioning without becoming directly engaged in the events that were shaping another part of the magical world. The isolation of the rainforest contributed to this sense of separation. Travel to and from Castelobruxo was not as straightforward as it was for schools located in more accessible regions. This limited the frequency of direct contact with other magical institutions, reinforcing the idea that each school operated within its own sphere. Communication with the Brazilian Ministry of Magic ensured that the institution remained informed, but this information was often presented in a way that emphasized context rather than urgency. Within the school, relationships between students and instructors continued to develop as they always had. Friendships formed through shared experiences, particularly those that required cooperation and trust in challenging environments. The study of magical flora and fauna often required students to work together, fostering a sense of community that was grounded in practical necessity. These interactions shaped their understanding of magic as something that existed within a broader system, rather than as an isolated skill. The natural world surrounding Castelobruxo also influenced how students perceived change. The rainforest itself operated according to cycles that were both steady and complex, where growth and decay occurred simultaneously, and where balance was maintained through constant adaptation. This perspective extended into their education, encouraging students to see magic as part of a larger system, rather than as a force to be controlled in isolation. Within this framework, the idea of distant conflict felt less immediate, as it did not directly alter the patterns they observed in their daily lives. Faculty members, while aware of global developments, remained focused on their responsibilities within the school. They ensured that students received a comprehensive education, preparing them for roles within their own communities. While discussions of international events may have occurred in more advanced classes, they were framed in a way that emphasized understanding rather than reaction. The goal was not to instill concern, but to provide context, allowing students to recognize the existence of a wider world without becoming defined by it. As the years of Voldemort's rise continued, Castelobruxo remained a place of steady progression. Students advanced through their studies, graduating and moving into the wider magical community with skills that reflected the unique nature of their education. Their experience of the war was shaped by distance, informed by knowledge, but not by direct involvement. This perspective allowed them to maintain a sense of continuity, even as other regions experienced disruption. In this way, Castelobruxo demonstrated how geographical and cultural distance could shape the experience of global events. The school did not ignore the reality of what was happening in Britain, but it did not allow it to redefine its purpose. Instead, it continued to function according to its own traditions, guided by the rhythms of the environment that surrounded it. The students who passed through its halls during this time carried with them an understanding of magic that was deeply rooted in observation and interaction. They had learned to navigate a world that required attention and patience, where change occurred gradually and often without immediate explanation. This perspective influenced how they interpreted events beyond their own region, allowing them to see the war in Britain as part of a larger system rather than as an isolated crisis. Castelobruxo, like the forest that sustained it, remained steady in the face of distant change. Its structure endured, its traditions continued, and its students moved forward through time with an education that was shaped by the world around them rather than by the conflicts that occurred beyond it. Mahoutokoro's school of magic existed within a setting shaped by both tradition and precision, reflecting the cultural structure of the region in which it stood. Located on a remote volcanic island in Japan, the school was concealed through layers of enchantment that blended seamlessly with the surrounding landscape. Its buildings, crafted from pale materials that changed in appearance depending on the achievements of its students, reflected a system where progress was not only measured but made visible over time. By the period of Voldemort's rise in Britain, Mahoutokoro had long established a reputation for discipline, structure, and a carefully maintained educational environment. Students at Mahoutokoro began their training at a younger age than those at many European schools, attending in stages that gradually increased in complexity and expectation. Early instruction focused on control, ensuring that magical ability developed in a measured and stable manner. As students advanced, their education expanded to include a broader range of disciplines, with an emphasis on both individual skill and collective responsibility. This layered approach created a steady progression where each stage built upon the previous one, reducing unpredictability and reinforcing consistency. During the years when Voldemort's influence began to spread within Britain, Mahoutokoro continued to operate according to this structured system. Information about events in Europe reached the school through official channels, but it was received within a framework that emphasized observation rather than reaction. Reports of conflict were noted, discussed among faculty, and understood as significant within their own context. Yet, they did not disrupt the routine of daily life within the institution. The distance between Mahoutokoro and Britain contributed to this sense of separation. Geographic distance alone did not define the relationship between magical communities, but it influenced how quickly and in what form information was received. By the time news arrived, it had often been interpreted, summarized, and presented in a way that reduced its immediacy. For students, this meant that the war existed as knowledge rather than experience, something to be understood but not directly felt. Within the school, lessons continued with the same steady rhythm that had defined previous years. Students practiced spellwork with an emphasis on precision, repeating techniques until they achieved consistency. Magical disciplines were taught with attention to detail, ensuring that each student developed a strong foundation before moving forward. This focus on mastery created an environment where change was gradual and controlled, limiting the influence of external uncertainty. The culture of Mahoutokoro reinforced this approach. Students were taught not only how to perform magic, but how to maintain composure in all circumstances. Emotional restraint was valued, not as a limitation, but as a means of ensuring stability. This perspective influenced how students responded to information about the wider world. Reports of conflict were processed with a sense of detachment, understood within an intellectual framework rather than an emotional one. Faculty members played a central role in maintaining this environment. Their responsibility extended beyond teaching, encompassing the preservation of the school's structure and the well-being of its students. When information about Voldemort's rise reached them, it was evaluated carefully, with attention given to its relevance and potential impact. Protective measures, where necessary, were implemented discreetly, ensuring that the institution remained secure without altering the experience of those within it. Mahoutokoro's approach to magical education also included an emphasis on responsibility. Students who misused magic faced consequences that extended beyond academic discipline, reinforcing the idea that power must be managed with care. This philosophy created a framework within which the concept of a dark wizard could be understood. Voldemort's actions were not dismissed, but they were interpreted as a deviation from principles that the school sought to uphold. Despite this understanding, the conflict in Britain did not become a defining element of life at Mahoutokoro. Students continued to focus on their studies, progressing through their education with attention to their own development. Friendships formed within the structure of the school, shaped by shared experiences and mutual expectations. The presence of distant events did not alter these relationships, which remained grounded in the immediate realities of student life. The physical environment of the island further contributed to this sense of continuity. Surrounded by water and separated from larger populations, the school existed within a space that felt contained and self-sufficient. The natural boundaries reinforced the idea that the institution operated according to its own rhythm, influenced more by internal structure than by external events. Seasonal changes marked the passage of time, providing a steady framework within which education continued. Communication with other magical schools was limited, consistent with the general pattern of the time. Without frequent international gatherings, students had little direct interaction with peers from different regions. Their understanding of other institutions remained theoretical, based on descriptions rather than experience. This distance reduced the likelihood that events in one school would directly influence another, allowing each to maintain its own course. As the years passed and Voldemort's influence grew within Britain, Mahoutokoro remained steady. The war did not reach its walls, nor did it disrupt the progression of its students. Instead, it existed as part of a broader awareness that the magical world was capable of instability, even if that instability was not immediately present in their own environment. This awareness did not create fear, but it did reinforce the importance of the principles that guided their education. Students who graduated during this period carried with them a perspective shaped by both discipline and distance. They understood that the magical world extended beyond their own experience, and that events in other regions could have consequences that were not immediately visible. At the same time, their education had prepared them to maintain composure and to act with precision, qualities that allowed them to navigate uncertainty without losing stability. Mahoutokoro, in these years, continued to function as it always had, guided by structure, discipline, and a commitment to steady progression. The rise of Voldemort, while significant in the broader context of magical history, did not redefine the institution. It remained a place where students learned to control their abilities, to understand their responsibilities, and to move forward through time with a sense of continuity. In this way, the school reflected a broader pattern within the magical world, where distance and tradition allowed certain institutions to endure without disruption. While conflict shaped one part of the world, others continued according to their own rhythms, preserving the conditions necessary for education to proceed without interruption. Uagadu School of Magic existed within a landscape that shaped not only its physical presence, but the very way magic was understood and practiced. Located in the mountains of the moon, its structures were often described not as fixed buildings, but as forms that seemed to emerge from the surrounding rock and cloud. This connection to the environment reflected a broader philosophy within the school, where magic was not seen as something separate from the world, but as something that flowed through it, to be understood rather than imposed. By the time of Voldemort's rise in Britain, Uagadu had long established itself as one of the most distinctive magical institutions in the world. It was known for its emphasis on wandless magic, a practice that differed significantly from the wand-based traditions common in Europe. Students learned to channel magic through gestures, intention, and focus, developing a level of control that did not rely on external tools. This approach created a different relationship between the individual and their magic, one that emphasized internal balance over external technique. Education at Uagadu followed a structure that encouraged observation and gradual mastery. Students were introduced to magic in ways that aligned with their environment, learning to recognize patterns and respond to them with precision. Instruction often extended beyond formal settings, with lessons taking place in open spaces where the interaction between magic and the natural world could be observed directly. This created a rhythm of learning that was steady and immersive, shaped by the surroundings rather than confined by rigid boundaries. During the years when Voldemort's influence began to expand within Britain, Uagadu remained largely unaffected in its daily operations. Information about events in Europe reached the school through indirect channels, often delayed and lacking in detail. The geographical distance, combined with the school's strong internal focus, meant that such information did not carry the same weight it might have in regions closer to the source of conflict. Reports of a dark wizard gaining power were acknowledged, but they did not alter the structure of education or the priorities of the institution. Within the school, life continued with a sense of continuity that reflected its long-established traditions. Students attended lessons, practiced their abilities, and progressed through their studies without interruption. The emphasis on wandless magic required a high degree of concentration and discipline, drawing attention inward rather than outward. This inward focus contributed to a sense of stability as students remained engaged with their own development rather than external events. Faculty members maintained this stability by ensuring that the curriculum remained consistent. While they were aware of global developments, their responsibility was to guide students through a system of education that had proven effective over generations. Discussions of international events, when they occurred, were framed within a broader understanding of magical history, allowing students to see them as part of a larger pattern rather than as immediate concerns. The philosophy of Uagadu also influenced how such events were interpreted. Magic, within this framework, was seen as a force that could be shaped by intention, but also one that required balance. The rise of a powerful wizard who sought to dominate others through magic was understood not only as a political or social issue, but as a disruption of that balance. This perspective did not lead to direct involvement, but it did provide a context through which students could understand the nature of such actions. For most students, however, the conflict in Britain remained distant. Their experience of Uagadu was defined by the daily process of learning, by the challenges of mastering complex forms of magic, and by the relationships they formed with their peers. The school's environment encouraged cooperation and mutual understanding, as students often relied on one another to develop their skills. This sense of community further reinforced the focus on internal stability, reducing the influence of external uncertainty. The physical setting of the school played a role in maintaining this sense of continuity. The mountains, with their shifting mists and changing light, created an environment that felt both constant and dynamic. Students learned to navigate this environment, to observe its patterns, and to adapt to its changes. This experience shaped their understanding of the world, encouraging a perspective that valued patience and awareness over immediate reaction. Communication with other magical institutions was limited, consistent with the broader pattern of the time. While Uagadu was recognized as one of the major wizarding schools, its interactions with others were infrequent, often occurring through formal channels rather than direct contact. This limited exchange of information contributed to the sense that each school operated within its own sphere, connected but not dependent on one another. As Voldemort's influence grew within Britain, the situation was monitored by the wider magical community, including African magical authorities. However, the lack of direct connection meant that Uagadu did not become involved in the conflict. Its role remained that of an observer, maintaining awareness without altering its own course. This approach allowed the school to continue its work without disruption, preserving the conditions necessary for education. Students who graduated during this period carried with them an understanding of magic that was shaped by this environment. They had developed skills that emphasized control, balance, and awareness, and they had done so within a system that remained stable despite external change. Their perspective on global events was informed by distance, allowing them to interpret such events within a broader context rather than as immediate concern. Uagadu, in these years, remained consistent in its purpose. it continued to educate students according to its traditions, maintaining a structure that had endured over time. The rise of Voldemort, while significant within certain regions, did not redefine the institution or its approach to magic. Instead, it existed alongside it, part of a wider world that did not always intersect directly with the experience of those within the school. In this way, Uagadu reflected a different aspect of the magical world, one where education was shaped by internal principles rather than external events. Its stability was not the result of isolation alone, but of a philosophy that emphasized continuity and balance. Within this framework, the passage of time was marked not by conflict, but by the steady progression of learning, as each generation of students moved forward, guided by traditions that remained unchanged. Not all magical education followed the structure of the recognized schools. Beyond the 11 institutions acknowledged by the international magical community, there existed a wide and often quiet network of smaller systems, informal arrangements, and localized traditions through which young witches and wizards learned to understand their abilities. These forms of education were less visible, rarely documented in official records, yet they remained a consistent part of the magical world, shaped by necessity, geography, and cultural preference. In some regions, families chose to educate their children at home, passing down knowledge through generations. This approach was often practical, particularly in areas where travel to a formal school was difficult or where communities preferred to remain self-contained. Instruction in these settings varied widely, depending on the experience and skill of those providing it. Some families maintained a structured curriculum, drawing from established magical texts and replicating the methods of larger schools as closely as possible. Others relied on more flexible approaches, focusing on practical magic that aligned with their daily lives. These home-based systems created an environment where learning was closely tied to individual circumstances. Students developed their abilities in familiar surroundings, guided by those they already trusted. This often led to strong foundational skills in certain areas, particularly those relevant to their immediate environment. At the same time, it could result in gaps in knowledge, especially in subjects that required specialized instruction or access to resources not readily available outside formal institutions. In addition to home education, there were smaller schools that operated without official recognition. These institutions were often established within local communities, serving a limited number of students. Their existence was shaped by regional needs, providing education in areas where larger schools were inaccessible or where cultural differences made integration into established systems less desirable. These schools varied in structure, some following formal schedules and curricula, while others adopted more flexible models that adapted to the needs of their students. The reasons for remaining outside official recognition were not always the same. In some cases, it was a matter of practicality, as smaller institutions lacked the resources or scale required to meet the standards set by international bodies. In others, it reflected a deliberate choice to maintain independence, preserving traditions that might otherwise be altered or diminished within a larger system. This independence allowed for a diversity of approaches to magical education, contributing to the overall richness of the magical world. During the years of Voldemort's rise in Britain, these informal systems continued to operate with little direct influence from external events. Information about the conflict reached them, but often in limited and fragmented ways. Without the structured communication channels available to larger institutions, news was carried through personal connections, traveling witches and wizards, and occasional contact with official authorities. This method of transmission meant that details were often incomplete, interpreted differently depending on the source. For students learning within these systems, the war remained distant. Their education was shaped by immediate concerns, by the skills they were developing and the environments in which they lived. Lessons focused on practical application, on ensuring that magic could be used safely and effectively in daily life. The absence of a centralized curriculum allowed for flexibility, but it also meant that awareness of global events was less consistent, varying from one community to another. The relationship between these informal systems and recognized schools was complex. In some cases, students educated at home or in smaller institutions later transferred to larger schools, bringing with them a different perspective shaped by their earlier experiences. In others, they remained within their local systems throughout their education, entering the wider magical community with skills that reflected their specific training. This movement between systems, while not always common, contributed to a subtle exchange of knowledge that connected different parts of the magical world. Magical governments were aware of these alternative forms of education, though their involvement was often limited. Their primary concern was to ensure that all magical individuals were capable of controlling their abilities, maintaining the secrecy that protected their society. As long as this condition was met, the specific method of education was often left to the discretion of families and communities. This approach allowed for a degree of autonomy, while still preserving the broader stability of the magical world. In regions where formal schools were distant or difficult to access, these informal systems played an essential role. They provided opportunities for learning that might otherwise have been unavailable, ensuring that magical ability could be developed regardless of circumstance. The quality of education varied, but the existence of these systems reflected the adaptability of magical communities, their ability to create structures that met their needs, even in the absence of centralized support. Despite their differences, these smaller and unregistered systems shared certain common elements with the recognized schools. They emphasized the importance of control, the need to understand the consequences of magical actions, and the value of passing knowledge from one generation to the next. These shared principles created a foundation that connected all forms of magical education, regardless of their scale or structure. As Voldemort's influence expanded within Britain, these systems remained largely unaffected in their daily operations. The conflict did not reach into most of these communities, nor did it disrupt the routines through which students learned. Instead, it existed as part of a wider narrative, acknowledged but not central to their experience. Their focus remained on the steady progression of education, on ensuring that each new generation developed the skills necessary to navigate their own environments. For those who grew up within these systems, the magical world was understood through a more localized perspective. Their knowledge of global events was shaped by distance, filtered through the experiences of those around them. This perspective did not diminish their understanding of magic, but it did influence how they interpreted the actions of figures like Voldemort, seeing them as part of a broader pattern rather than as defining events. In this way, the existence of smaller and unregistered schools added another layer to the structure of magical education. They demonstrated that learning was not confined to a single model, but could take many forms, each shaped by its own context. While the recognized institutions provided a framework for understanding the larger system, these informal arrangements ensured that education remained accessible and adaptable. The magical world, in its quiet complexity, was sustained not only by its most prominent schools, but by these smaller, less visible systems that operated alongside them. Together, they formed a network that allowed knowledge to persist, even in the face of change, maintaining continuity through diversity rather than uniformity. The fall of Voldemort marked a moment of change within Britain, but beyond its borders, the shift was experienced in a quieter and more gradual way. News of his defeat did not arrive everywhere at once, nor did it carry the same weight in every region. Instead, it moved outward through the established channels of magical communication, carried by ministries, passed between officials, and eventually reaching schools and communities that had only observed the conflict from a distance. In the immediate aftermath, there was a sense of relief within the British magical world, a recognition that a period of instability had come to an end. For other countries, that relief was more measured. The threat, while acknowledged, had never fully extended into their own daily experience. Voldemort's influence had remained largely confined to a specific region, and so his fall, while significant, did not require the same level of recovery elsewhere. It was understood as an important event, but not one that demanded widespread adjustment. At Beauxbatons, the news arrived through official communication from the French Ministry of Magic. Faculty members were informed first, ensuring that the information was accurate before it reached the students. When it was eventually shared more broadly, it was presented with a sense of completion rather than urgency. The conflict, which had remained distant throughout its duration, was now concluded. For most students, this marked the end of something they had known only in passing, a story that had unfolded elsewhere and now reached its resolution. Durmstrang received the news with a similar sense of distance. The rise and fall of powerful figures was not unfamiliar within the historical framework that shaped the school's perspective. Voldemort's defeat was noted as part of this pattern, an example of how influence could be gained and lost over time. There was no immediate disruption to the institution's structure, no sudden shift in its priorities. Instead, the event was absorbed into its understanding of the broader magical world, acknowledged without altering the steady progression of education. At Ilvermorny, the response was shaped by the American magical community's approach to external events. The Magical Congress of the United States of America confirmed the reports before allowing them to circulate widely. Once established as fact, the information was shared with a tone that emphasized stability. The situation in Britain had changed, but the structure of magical society in North America remained intact. For students, the news was received with interest, but not with the intensity that might have accompanied a more immediate threat. In more distant regions, such as Castelobruxo, Uagadu, and Mahoutokoro, the fall of Voldemort was understood primarily as a conclusion to a conflict that had remained external throughout its course. The geographical and cultural distance that had limited the impact of the war also shaped the reception of its end. Faculty members acknowledged the significance of the event, but for students, it often felt like the closing of a narrative that had never fully entered their own experience. The manner in which this news was delivered reflected the priorities of each institution. Schools remained focused on maintaining continuity, ensuring that education proceeded without unnecessary disruption. The fall of Voldemort, while important, did not require immediate changes to curriculum or structure. Instead, it became part of the broader context within which magical education existed, an event to be understood rather than reacted to. For students, the impact of this news was often subtle. Those with connections to Britain may have felt a more personal sense of relief. Others viewed it as confirmation that stability had been restored in a region that had experienced disruption. In either case, the event did not redefine their daily lives. Lessons continued, routines remained in place, and the progression of education moved forward as it always had. There was also a recognition, particularly among older students and faculty, that the fall of one figure did not eliminate the possibility of future conflict. Magical history contained many examples of similar cycles, where periods of stability were followed by moments of disruption. Voldemort's defeat, while significant, was understood within this larger pattern. It represented a resolution, but not a permanent conclusion to the challenges that could arise within the magical world. Magical governments, in their communications, often reinforced this perspective. While they confirmed the end of Voldemort's influence, they also emphasized the importance of continued vigilance. This approach ensured that the event was neither minimized nor exaggerated, allowing it to be integrated into the broader understanding of magical society without creating unnecessary alarm. For the institutions themselves, the most notable effect of Voldemort's fall was the reaffirmation of their independence. Each school had continued to operate throughout the conflict, maintaining its own structure and priorities. The conclusion of the war did not require them to change course, but it did reinforce the idea that the magical world was composed of many interconnected yet distinct systems. What happened in one region, while important, did not automatically reshape the others. Students who graduated in the years following this event carried with them an awareness of what had occurred, but their own experiences remained rooted in the stability of their education. They had witnessed the resolution of a conflict that had existed at the edges of their understanding, and they entered the wider magical world with a perspective shaped by both distance and observation. In this way, the fall of Voldemort marked a turning point that was both significant and contained. It brought an end to a period of instability within Britain, while allowing the rest of the magical world to continue its steady progression. Schools remained places of continuity, where the focus on learning persisted regardless of external events. The magical world, vast and varied, absorbed this change without losing its balance. Each institution acknowledged the event, integrated it into its understanding, and then continued forward, guided by traditions that extended far beyond any single moment in time. The years of Harry Potter's childhood unfolded with a quiet steadiness across much of the magical world, marked less by disruption and more by continuity. In Britain, the fall of Voldemort had brought an end to a period of fear, allowing institutions like Hogwarts to return to their established routines. Beyond Britain, where the conflict had been experienced only at a distance, this return to normalcy felt even more complete. For most magical schools, these years passed without significant interruption, defined by the steady rhythm of education rather than the memory of war. Students entering schools such as Beauxbatons, Durmstrang, Ilvermorny, and others during this time did so without a direct connection to the events that had shaped the previous generation. For them, Voldemort's name, if it was mentioned at all, existed within the context of history rather than lived experience. Lessons focused on the development of magical skill, on understanding theory, and on mastering the disciplines that formed the foundation of their education. The absence of immediate threat allowed these institutions to operate with a sense of calm that reinforced their long-standing traditions. At Beauxbatons, the atmosphere remained one of refinement and composure. Students progressed through their studies with attention to precision, guided by instructors who emphasized control and elegance in the use of magic. The chateau and its surrounding grounds provided a setting that felt unchanged, where the passage of time was marked by seasons and academic milestones rather than external events. The stability of the environment allowed students to focus fully on their development, shaping their understanding of magic through consistent practice. Durmstrang continued to maintain its distinct character, defined by discipline and a preference for independence. Students there were accustomed to an environment that required resilience, where learning often involved direct challenge and personal responsibility. The absence of immediate conflict did not alter this approach, but it did allow the school to function without the need to respond to external pressures. For those studying within its walls, these years were shaped by the demands of their education rather than by concerns about the wider world. At Ilvermorny, the structure of magical education reflected a balance between tradition and independence. Students from across North America gathered to learn within a system that had evolved separately from European influences. The Magical Congress of the United States maintained a careful watch over the broader magical world, but within the school itself, life continued without disruption. Students attended classes, formed friendships, and advanced through their studies with little awareness of the historical significance of events that had taken place before their time. In more distant regions, such as Castelobruxo and Uagadu, the sense of continuity was even more pronounced. The natural environments surrounding these schools played a central role in shaping their educational systems, creating rhythms that were tied to the land rather than to external development. Students learned to engage with magical plants, creatures, and forces in ways that required patience and observation. These experiences grounded their understanding of magic, making distant conflicts seem abstract in comparison to the immediate realities of their education. Mahoutokoro, with its structured progression and emphasis on discipline, continued to guide students through clearly defined stages of learning. The school's system ensured that each student developed control and responsibility over time, reinforcing a sense of stability that extended beyond the classroom. The years of Harry Potter's childhood passed within this framework, marked by steady advancement rather than sudden change. Across all these institutions, the absence of large-scale conflict allowed magical education to proceed without interruption. Students focused on mastering spells, preparing for examinations, and navigating the social dynamics of their schools. Friendships were formed, rivalries emerged, and personal growth unfolded within an environment that remained largely insulated from external events. The magical world, in this period, felt consistent and reliable, its structures functioning as they had for generations. Communication between magical communities continued at a measured pace, maintaining awareness of global developments without allowing them to dominate daily life. Ministries exchanged information, monitored potential risks, and ensured that the statute of secrecy remained intact. These efforts were largely invisible to students, who experienced the world through the lens of their immediate surroundings, rather than through the complexities of international governance. For those who grew up during this time, the magical world was defined by opportunity rather than uncertainty. They entered their schools with expectations shaped by stability, believing that their education would proceed along predictable lines. The absence of visible conflict reinforced this belief, creating a sense of normalcy that extended across regions and institutions. Yet, beneath this calm, there remained an awareness among certain members of the magical community that the conditions which had allowed Voldemort to rise had not entirely disappeared. This awareness was not widely shared among students, but it existed within the decisions of those who governed magical society. Precautions were maintained, systems were monitored, and a quiet vigilance persisted, ensuring that stability was preserved without drawing attention to the reasons behind it. For the majority of students, however, these considerations remained distant. Their experience of magical education was shaped by the daily routines of their schools, by the lessons they attended and the skills they developed. The years passed with a sense of continuity that allowed them to focus on their own growth, largely unaffected by the events that had shaped the previous generation. As Harry Potter grew up in the non-magical world, unaware of his place within this broader system, students across the globe were moving through their own educational journeys. They learned to control their abilities, to understand the principles of magic, and to prepare for the roles they would eventually take within their communities. Their experiences were diverse, shaped by the unique characteristics of their schools, yet unified by a shared sense of stability. In this way, the magical world during these years maintained a quiet balance. The structures that supported education remained intact, allowing each new generation to develop within an environment that felt secure and predictable. While the memory of past conflict lingered in certain regions, it did not define the experience of those who came after. The passage of time continued, steady and unbroken, carrying students forward through their studies and into the wider magical world. And within this continuity, the foundations of magical society were preserved, ready to face whatever changes might come, even if those changes were not yet visible to those living through these quiet years. The reintroduction of the Triwizard Tournament marked a rare moment of direct contact between some of the major European wizarding schools, bringing together students and staff from Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang after many years of limited interaction. For much of the magical world, schools had existed in quiet parallel, aware of one another but seldom engaged in shared events. The decision to revive the tournament represented a shift toward cooperation, though it remained carefully controlled and limited in scope. By the time the tournament was announced, the wider magical world had been experiencing a period of relative stability. The absence of large-scale conflict allowed institutions to consider forms of collaboration that might previously have seemed unnecessary or risky. The tournament itself was framed not as a competition driven by rivalry, but as an opportunity to strengthen ties between schools, to encourage understanding, and to allow students to experience perspectives beyond their own environment. At Beauxbatons, preparations for participation reflected the school's emphasis on presentation and discipline. Students selected to represent the academy were expected to demonstrate not only skill, but composure, carrying with them the reputation of their institution. The journey to Hogwarts, undertaken with ceremony and careful planning, marked a departure from the usual isolation of the school. For many students, it was their first direct experience of another major magical institution, an opportunity to observe differences that had previously existed only in description. Durmstrang approached the tournament with a different perspective, shaped by its own traditions. Participation was viewed as a demonstration of strength and capability, an opportunity to affirm the school's standing within the wider magical community. Students selected to attend were expected to embody the discipline and resilience associated with the institution. The journey itself, conducted with a sense of purpose rather than spectacle, reflected the school's preference for restraint. At Hogwarts, the arrival of these visiting schools created a temporary shift in the environment. Students who had grown accustomed to a familiar routine were suddenly exposed to new cultures, new approaches to magic, and new ways of understanding the world. The presence of Beauxbatons and Durmstrang introduced a visible reminder that Hogwarts was part of a larger system, one that extended beyond the boundaries of Britain. For the students of the visiting schools, the experience of Hogwarts provided a point of comparison. They observed its traditions, its structure, and its methods of instruction, noting both similarities and differences. Conversations between students often centered on these observations, creating a quiet exchange of ideas that extended beyond the formal structure of the tournament itself. These interactions were not always direct or explicit, but they contributed to a gradual broadening of perspective. The tournament, while structured as a competition, functioned as more than a test of individual ability. It created a shared experience that connected students from different backgrounds, allowing them to engage with one another in ways that would not have been possible within their separate institutions. This connection, though temporary, highlighted the potential for cooperation, suggesting that the isolation of schools was not absolute. Despite this increased interaction, the scope of the tournament remained limited. Only a small number of students from each school were directly involved, and the event itself was confined to a specific period of time. For the majority of students across the magical world, life continued unchanged. Schools outside of Europe, such as Ilvermorny, Castelobruxo, Uagadu, and Mahoutokoro, observed the tournament from a distance, aware of its occurrence but not directly participating. Information about the event reached these institutions through official channels and informal networks, providing a glimpse into the interactions taking place in Britain. For some, it represented a point of interest, an example of how cooperation between schools could be structured. For others, it remained a distant event, relevant but not central to their own experience. The absence of direct involvement reinforced the sense that each school operated within its own sphere, even as moments of connection occurred. The reintroduction of the tournament also reflected the priorities of magical governance during this period. Ministries of magic supported the event as a means of fostering goodwill, recognizing that cooperation between institutions could contribute to broader stability. At the same time, they maintained control over its structure, ensuring that it did not create risks that might disrupt the balance they sought to preserve. Within the schools that participated, the presence of visitors introduced subtle changes to daily life. Students became more aware of differences in teaching methods, in cultural expectations, and in the ways magic was practiced. These observations did not lead to immediate transformation, but they created a foundation for future understanding. The recognition that other systems existed, each with its own logic and effectiveness, contributed to a more complex view of the magical world. The tournament itself unfolded according to its established format, with challenges designed to test skill, adaptability, and judgment. While the outcomes of these challenges were significant for those directly involved, their broader impact lay in the connections they created. Students who might never have met under ordinary circumstances found themselves sharing experiences, forming impressions that would remain with them long after the event had concluded. For Hogwarts, the tournament represented a moment of renewed visibility within the wider magical world. The school, which had often been viewed primarily within the context of Britain, became a focal point for international interaction. This visibility brought with it a greater awareness of its role within the global system of magical education, highlighting both its similarities to and differences from other institutions. At Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, the return from Hogwarts marked a gradual re-entry into their own established routines. Students carried with them memories of the event, impressions of another school, and an expanded understanding of the magical world. These experiences did not fundamentally alter their education, but they added a layer of perspective that had not been present before. For the wider magical world, the tournament served as a reminder that isolation was not the only way for schools to exist. While most institutions continued to operate independently, the event demonstrated that cooperation was possible, even if it remained limited. It suggested that the boundaries between schools, though strong, were not fixed, and that moments of connection could occur without disrupting the overall structure. In this way, the Triwizard Tournament functioned as both a continuation of tradition and a subtle shift in perspective. It did not redefine the system of magical education, but it introduced a point of contact that allowed for a greater awareness of its diversity. Students returned to their schools, routines resumed, and the steady progression of education continued, but with a quiet recognition that the world beyond their own institution was larger and more varied than they had previously understood. The role of a headmaster or headmistress within a magical school extended far beyond administration, shaping not only the structure of education, but the atmosphere in which students learned and developed. Across the different wizarding institutions, these figures held a quiet authority that influenced how each school responded to the wider world. Their decisions, often made without public discussion, determined whether external events would be acknowledged, minimized, or absorbed without disruption. At Hogwarts, leadership under Albus Dumbledore created an environment that balanced tradition with adaptability. His presence was marked by a calm awareness of events beyond the school, combined with a deliberate effort to maintain stability within it. Even as circumstances in Britain began to change, the daily rhythm of Hogwarts continued, guided by a structure that allowed students to focus on their education without being overwhelmed by the uncertainty outside its wall. Dumbledore's approach reflected a broader understanding that knowledge required continuity, and that learning could not flourish in an atmosphere defined by constant reaction. At Beauxbatons, the headmistress maintained a different form of control, one that emphasized composure and refinement. The school's leadership ensured that its environment remained consistent, even when information from abroad suggested instability elsewhere. Decisions were made with careful consideration, prioritizing the preservation of the academy's traditions. External events were acknowledged, but they were not allowed to disrupt the expectations placed upon students. The emphasis remained on discipline, presentation, and the steady development of magical skill. Durmstrang's leadership reflected the institution's more austere character. Authority was exercised with a focus on order and resilience, reinforcing the expectation that students would adapt to their environment without requiring constant guidance. The headmaster's role was less visible in daily life, but no less influential. Decisions regarding the school's response to external developments were made with an emphasis on maintaining independence. The rise of powerful figures in other regions was observed, but it did not prompt immediate change within the institution. Stability was preserved through continuity rather than adaptation. At Ilvermorny, leadership operated within the framework of the American magical system, balancing institutional autonomy with the oversight of the Magical Congress. The headmaster and faculty worked together to ensure that the school remained aligned with broader regulations while maintaining its distinct identity. Communication with governing bodies influenced how information about global events was handled, ensuring that students were informed in a way that preserved calm rather than creating concern. This structured approach allowed the school to maintain consistency even as it remained aware of changes beyond its borders. In more distant institutions, such as Castelobruxo and Uagadu, leadership was shaped by local traditions that emphasized connection to environment and community. The heads of these schools guided their students through systems that had developed over long periods of time, focusing on internal stability rather than external reaction. Their authority was often expressed through continuity, ensuring that established methods of teaching were preserved. External events, including the rise of Voldemort, were interpreted within this context, acknowledged but not allowed to alter the fundamental purpose of the institution. Mahoutokoro's leadership reflected a structured and disciplined approach, where authority was closely tied to the progression of students through clearly defined stages. The head of the school ensured that each aspect of education remained aligned with established expectations, maintaining a system where advancement was earned through consistent effort. External developments were considered carefully, but any response was measured, ensuring that the school's internal structure remained unaffected. This emphasis on control extended beyond the classroom, shaping how students understood their responsibilities within the wider magical world. Across all these institutions, leadership shared a common responsibility to protect the integrity of education while maintaining awareness of the world beyond the school. This balance required careful judgment, as too much focus on external events could disrupt the learning environment, while complete isolation could leave students unprepared for the realities they might eventually face. Headmasters and headmistresses navigated this balance quietly, making decisions that were rarely visible to students but had a lasting impact on their experience. The differences in leadership styles also reflected broader cultural perspectives. In some schools, authority was expressed through visible presence, with headmasters actively engaging with students and shaping the atmosphere of daily life. In others, it was more distant, with leadership operating through established systems that required little direct intervention. These variations influenced how each institution responded to change, determining whether adaptation occurred gradually or not at all. During the years surrounding Harry Potter's time at Hogwarts, these leadership decisions became particularly significant. The return of Voldemort introduced a level of uncertainty that required careful management, even in regions where his influence was not directly felt. Headmasters ensured that protective measures were considered, communication with governing bodies was maintained, and the structure of education remained intact. Their role was not to react visibly, but to ensure that the conditions for learning continued without interruption. For students, the presence of this leadership was often subtle. They experienced the results of decisions rather than the decisions themselves, noticing the consistency of their environment rather than the effort required to maintain it. Classes continued, routines remained in place, and the progression of their education followed established patterns. The absence of visible disruption reinforced the sense that their schools existed as stable systems, even when the wider world suggested otherwise. Faculty members supported this stability, working in alignment with the leadership to ensure that each aspect of education functioned as intended. Their role extended beyond teaching, contributing to the overall environment of the school. Together, they formed a structure that allowed students to focus on their development, shielded from external uncertainty while still being prepared to understand it when necessary. In this way, the role of headmasters and headmistresses shaped the experience of magical education during this period. Their influence ensured that each school maintained its identity, preserving the traditions that defined it while quietly adapting to the presence of change. They provided continuity in a world that was not always stable, guiding their institutions through periods of uncertainty without allowing that uncertainty to define the experience of their students. The leadership of these schools, though often unseen, formed a foundation upon which the entire system of magical education depended. It was through their decisions that stability was maintained, allowing the magical world to continue its steady progression, even as events beyond the classroom suggested that change was always possible. The return of Voldemort did not announce itself to the wider magical world with clarity or certainty. Instead, it emerged gradually, first as rumor, then as fragmented reports, and only later as something that could be acknowledged with confidence. Within Britain, the signs were more immediate, but beyond its borders, the situation was less clear. Magical governments received information through established channels, yet much of it was uncertain, shaped by conflicting accounts and the reluctance of officials to confirm what could not yet be proven. In many regions, the initial response was cautious skepticism. The idea that a figure believed to have been defeated had returned carried a sense of improbability, particularly for those who had never experienced his influence directly. Ministries of magic outside Britain approached the reports with restraint, seeking verification before taking any form of action. This delay was not born of indifference, but of a system that required confirmation before response, ensuring that decisions were grounded in certainty rather than speculation. At Beauxbatons, information about Voldemort's return reached the school through the French ministry, but it was presented without urgency. Faculty members were made aware of the reports, yet they did not immediately alter the structure of education. Students continued their studies, their routines unchanged, as the situation was assessed at a distance. Discussions among staff reflected a measured approach, recognizing the possibility of renewed conflict while acknowledging the lack of definitive evidence. Durmstrang received similar reports, though they were interpreted within the school's existing framework of understanding. The rise of powerful figures was not unfamiliar, and the uncertainty surrounding these reports reinforced a tendency toward observation rather than reaction. Students, largely removed from the direct influence of British events, experienced little change in their daily lives. The possibility of Voldemort's return was acknowledged, but it remained abstract, not yet translated into immediate consequence. At Ilvermorny, the response was shaped by the structure of the American magical government. The Magical Congress monitored developments carefully, maintaining communication with its British counterpart while avoiding premature conclusions. Within the school, this cautious approach translated into continuity. Students were not burdened with unverified information, and the focus remained on their education. The possibility of renewed conflict existed as a distant concern, one that did not disrupt the steady progression of learning. In more distant institutions, such as Castelobruxo, Uagadu, and Mahoutokoro, the sense of uncertainty was even more pronounced. Information arrived slowly, often filtered through multiple sources before reaching faculty members. The lack of clarity made it difficult to determine the extent of the threat, and so the prevailing response was to maintain stability while remaining attentive to further development. Students in these schools continued their routines, largely unaware of the significance of what was being discussed among their instructors. The gradual nature of Voldemort's return contributed to this measured response. Unlike his first rise, which had developed over time within a specific region, his reappearance was marked by ambiguity. There were no immediate, widespread signs that could be observed beyond Britain, no direct actions that would compel a global reaction. Instead, there were indications, subtle and uncertain, that required interpretation before they could be understood. Magical governments played a central role in shaping how this information was handled. Their responsibility was to maintain order, to prevent unnecessary alarm while ensuring that potential threats were not ignored. This balance required careful judgment, as premature action could create instability, while inaction could leave communities unprepared. The result was a period of quiet observation, where information was gathered and assessed without immediate change to existing structures. Within schools, this approach translated into continuity. Lessons proceeded as they always had, guided by established curricula and the steady presence of instructors. Students remained focused on their studies, their understanding of the world shaped more by their immediate environment than by distant uncertainties. The possibility of Voldemort's return existed at the edges of awareness, acknowledged but not central to their experience. Among older students and faculty, there was a recognition that the situation might develop further. Those with a deeper understanding of magical history were aware that such events often unfolded gradually, their significance becoming clear only over time. This awareness did not lead to visible changes, but it did create a sense of attentiveness, a quiet readiness to respond if necessary. As the reports became more consistent and evidence began to accumulate, the initial skepticism gave way to cautious acceptance. Ministries of magic acknowledged the possibility that Voldemort had indeed returned, though the extent of his influence remained uncertain. Even then, the response was measured, reflecting the same careful approach that had defined the earlier stages of the situation. For most schools, this transition from uncertainty to recognition did not alter the structure of education. The focus remained on maintaining stability, ensuring that students could continue their learning without disruption. Protective measures, where considered necessary, were implemented discreetly without drawing attention to the reasons behind them. This approach preserved the sense of continuity that was essential to the functioning of each institution. Students, for the most part, remained removed from these developments. Their understanding of the situation was shaped by limited information, often presented in a way that emphasized context rather than urgency. They continued to attend classes, to practice their magic, and to progress through their education, largely unaffected by the shifting perceptions of the wider magical world. The return of Voldemort, in its early stages, existed as a possibility rather than a certainty, a situation that required careful observation rather than immediate reaction. For the global system of magical education, this meant that life continued as it always had, guided by routines that provided stability even in the presence of uncertainty. In this way, the early response to Voldemort's return reflected the structure of the magical world itself. Cautious, measured, and shaped by a preference for continuity. Schools remained places of learning, insulated from external disruption, while the wider community worked to understand a situation that was still unfolding. The full impact of his return had not yet been realized, and so the world continued forward, steady and composed, waiting for clarity that had not yet fully arrived. Beauxbatons continued to operate with a steady sense of composure during the period when Voldemort's return began to take clearer form. The early uncertainty that had surrounded the reports gradually gave way to a more defined understanding, carried through official communication from the French Ministry of Magic. By the time confirmation reached the school, it was presented with care, framed within a context that emphasized awareness rather than alarm. The leadership of Beauxbatons responded in a manner consistent with its long-standing traditions. The primary concern remained the preservation of the educational environment, ensuring that students could continue their studies without disruption. Information about the renewed conflict in Britain was acknowledged among faculty, and discussions were held regarding its potential implications. These conversations, however, remained largely within administrative circles, shaping decisions that would not be immediately visible to those within the school. Protective measures, where deemed necessary, were reviewed and adjusted with discretion. The chateau and its surrounding grounds were already maintained under layers of enchantment designed to ensure both concealment and safety. These protections were reinforced quietly, integrated into existing systems rather than introduced as visible changes. Students moved through their daily routines without noticing any significant difference, their experience shaped by continuity rather than alteration. Within the classroom, lessons continued with the same emphasis on precision and control that defined the institution. Instructors maintained their focus on teaching, guiding students through established curricula that required attention and discipline. The presence of external conflict did not alter the structure of these lessons, though in some cases it influenced the way certain topics were discussed. Advanced students, particularly those studying defensive magic, encountered subtle references to the importance of awareness and preparation, framed within a broader understanding of magical responsibility. Among the students, awareness of Voldemort's return varied. Some had heard the name before, often in the context of historical discussion, and now recognized it as part of an ongoing situation. Others remained largely unaware of its significance, their attention directed toward their studies and the immediate concerns of their daily lives. Conversations about the conflict occurred, but they were often brief and speculative, reflecting the limited information available to them. The distance between Beauxbatons and Britain continued to shape how the situation was perceived. While communication between the two magical communities existed, it did not carry the immediacy that might have created a sense of urgency. The conflict, though real and increasingly defined, remained external, something that was understood but not directly experienced. This separation allowed the school to maintain its environment of stability, even as the wider magical world began to shift. Faculty members played a key role in maintaining this balance. Their responsibility extended beyond instruction, encompassing the management of information and the preservation of calm. They ensured that students were not exposed to unnecessary concern, presenting developments in a way that allowed for understanding without disruption. This approach reflected a broader philosophy, where knowledge was introduced gradually, aligned with the capacity of students to process it. The structure of Beauxbatons supported this measured response. Its emphasis on discipline and composure created an environment where sudden change was less likely to take hold. Students were accustomed to maintaining focus, to working within defined systems that provided a sense of order. This familiarity with structure allowed them to continue their education without being unsettled by events that remained distant. At the same time, there was an underlying awareness among the faculty that the situation might evolve. The return of Voldemort, once confirmed, carried implications that extended beyond Britain, even if those implications were not immediately visible. This awareness influenced decisions made at the administrative level, guiding preparations that would ensure the school remained secure under changing conditions. Despite these considerations, the daily life of the institution remained largely unchanged. Students attended lessons, practiced their magic, and progressed through their studies with the same steady rhythm that had defined previous years. Seasonal changes continued to mark the passage of time, reinforcing the sense that the school existed within its own continuity. The presence of distant conflict did not alter this rhythm, allowing education to proceed without interruption. Interactions with other schools remained limited during this period. The connections established during the Tri-Wizard tournament provided a point of reference, but they did not lead to ongoing collaboration. Each institution continued to operate within its own sphere, maintaining independence while remaining aware of the broader system to which it belonged. This pattern of limited interaction contributed to the sense that events in one region, while significant, did not necessarily redefine the experience of others. For students nearing the end of their education, the return of Voldemort introduced a subtle shift in perspective. As they prepared to leave the structured environment of the school, they became more aware of the complexities of the wider magical world. The knowledge that conflict existed beyond their immediate surroundings encouraged a more thoughtful approach to their future roles. Though it did not overshadow the achievements of their studies, younger students, by contrast, remained largely focused on their own development. Their understanding of the situation was shaped by limited exposure, and their experience of Beauxbatons continued to be defined by the routines and expectations of the school. The environment provided them with a sense of security that allowed them to grow without the burden of external uncertainty. In this way, Beauxbatons navigated the period of Voldemort's return with a quiet consistency that reflected its traditions. The school acknowledged the reality of the situation, implemented measures to ensure safety, and maintained awareness of developments beyond its borders. At the same time, it preserved the conditions necessary for education, allowing students to continue their learning without disruption. The balance between awareness and stability defined the institution's response. It neither ignored the presence of conflict nor allowed it to dominate the experience of those within its walls. Instead, it remained steady, guided by principles that emphasized continuity and control. And so, while the magical world beyond Britain began to recognize the significance of Voldemort's return, Beauxbatons continued its work, its halls filled with the quiet progression of learning, its students moving forward through time with a sense of calm that reflected the enduring structure of the school itself. Durmstrang entered the period of Voldemort's confirmed return with a reputation that drew increased attention from the wider magical world. Its long-standing association with a more permissive approach to certain branches of magic placed it in a position where external observers began to look more closely at its practices and its students. This attention did not arise from direct involvement in the conflict, but from the perception that its traditions might align, in some way, with the ideas that Voldemort represented. Within the institution, this shift in perception was not immediately reflected in daily life. The structure of education remained consistent, guided by the same emphasis on discipline and independence that had defined the school for generations. Students continued their studies, practicing spells and refining their abilities within an environment that expected resilience and self-control. The routines of the school provided a sense of continuity, allowing it to function without visible disruption. Even as external scrutiny increased, the leadership of Durmstrang was aware of the attention being directed toward the school. Communication from other magical institutions and governing bodies carried a tone of cautious inquiry, reflecting concerns that extended beyond simple observation. These concerns were not always expressed directly, but they were present in the way information was exchanged, in the questions that were asked, and in the assumptions that accompanied them. The school's response to this attention was measured, maintaining its independence while ensuring that its internal structure remained intact. Among the students, awareness of this scrutiny varied. Some recognized that their school's reputation placed them in a position where they were viewed differently by others. This awareness did not necessarily lead to change in behavior, but it did create a sense of distance, reinforcing the idea that Durmstrang existed apart from other institutions. For others, particularly those younger or less connected to the wider magical world, the attention remained abstract, something that existed beyond their immediate experience. The presence of individuals with past connections to darker movements contributed to the complexity of this period. Figures such as Igor Karkaroff, who had been associated with Voldemort during his earlier rise, represented a link between the school and the broader conflict. While such individuals did not define the institution as a whole, their history influenced how Durmstrang was perceived. The distinction between individual actions and institutional identity was not always clearly understood by those observing from outside. Within the school, this distinction was more apparent. Students and faculty recognized that the actions of a few did not determine the nature of the entire institution. The curriculum, while allowing for the study of advanced and sometimes controversial forms of magic, did not promote the ideology associated with Voldemort. Instead, it emphasized understanding, control, and the ability to navigate complex aspects of magic with awareness. This approach created a framework within which students could engage with challenging material without being directed toward a specific path. Despite this internal clarity, the external perception of Durmstrang remained influenced by its history. Other schools, particularly those with more restrictive approaches to magic, viewed it with a degree of caution. This caution did not lead to direct conflict, but it did shape the nature of interaction between institutions. Communication was maintained, but it carried an undercurrent of reservation, reflecting the uncertainties associated with the school's reputation. The return of Voldemort intensified these perceptions, as his ideology echoed themes that had existed within certain parts of European magical history. The emphasis on blood purity, in particular, created a point of comparison that drew attention to Durmstrang's past associations. Within the school, this connection was understood as a distortion rather than a continuation. but the distinction was not always recognized by those outside it. Faculty members at Durmstrang addressed this situation through continuity rather than confrontation. They maintained the structure of education, ensuring that students continued to develop their abilities within a stable environment. Discussions of Voldemort's return, when they occurred, were framed within a broader understanding of magical history, emphasizing patterns rather than immediate judgment. This approach allowed students to contextualize the situation without being drawn into it. For many students, the experience of this period was defined by the balance between internal stability and external perception. They continued their studies as they always had, yet they were increasingly aware that their institution was viewed through a particular lens. This awareness did not disrupt their education, but it did shape how they understood their place within the wider magical world. The isolation of Durmstrang contributed to its ability to maintain continuity. Its remote location limited direct interaction with other institutions, reducing the impact of external scrutiny on daily life. Students remained focused on their studies, their routines shaped by the demands of their education rather than by the opinions of others. This separation reinforced the sense that the school operated according to its own principles, independent of external influence. At the same time, the leadership of the school ensured that it remained aware of developments beyond its borders. Protective measures were considered, and communication with governing bodies was maintained, though often with a degree of restraint. The goal was not to respond visibly to external concerns, but to ensure that the institution remained secure and stable. As the conflict in Britain continued to develop, Durmstrang's position remained largely unchanged. It did not become directly involved, nor did it alter its fundamental structure in response to external events. Instead, it continued to function as it always had, guided by traditions that emphasized strength, discipline, and independence. Students who passed through the school during this time carried with them an understanding shaped by both their education and the perceptions that surrounded it. They had learned to navigate a world where reputation could influence interpretation, and where actions were often viewed within broader contexts. This perspective, developed within the environment of Durmstrang, influenced how they engaged with the wider magical community. In this way, the period of Voldemort's return highlighted the complexities of perception within the magical world. Durmstrang, while unchanged in its core purpose, became a point of focus for concerns that extended beyond its actual practices. Its ability to maintain continuity in the face of such attention reflected the strength of its internal structure, allowing it to continue its work without being defined by external judgment. And so, while the wider magical world adjusted to the reality of Voldemort's return, Durmstrang remained steady, its halls filled with the quiet discipline of learning, its students moving forward through their education within a system that endured despite the shifting perceptions that surrounded it. Ilvermorny continued to function with a quiet steadiness during the period when Voldemort's return became more widely accepted within the magical world. The earlier uncertainty had given way to confirmation, carried through communication between magical governments, yet the effect of this change remained measured within North America. The distance from Britain, combined with the structure of the American magical system, shaped a response that emphasized awareness without disruption. The Magical Congress of the United States of America monitored developments with careful attention, maintaining contact with British authorities while preserving its own independence. Information was verified before being shared, ensuring that the understanding of events remained consistent and controlled. This approach influenced how the situation was presented within Ilvermorny, where students were not immediately exposed to the full complexity of the conflict. Instead, knowledge was introduced gradually, aligned with the need to maintain stability within the school. Daily life at Ilvermorny continued with the same structure that had defined previous years. Students attended lessons, practiced their magic, and progressed through their studies without visible interruption. The curriculum remained unchanged, guided by a balance of theory and practice that encouraged both understanding and control. Professors maintained their focus on instruction, ensuring that each student developed the skills necessary to navigate the magical world with confidence. Within the classrooms, there were subtle shifts in emphasis, particularly in subjects related to defense and magical law. Instructors introduced concepts that encouraged awareness of potential threats, framing them within broader lessons about responsibility and preparation. These discussions did not center on Voldemort directly, but they reflected an understanding that the magical world was capable of instability. The goal was not to create concern, but to provide context, allowing students to develop a more complete understanding of their environment. Among the students, awareness of Voldemort's return varied. Those with connections to Britain or with families who followed international developments closely were more likely to recognize the significance of the situation. For others, the conflict remained distant, something acknowledged but not central to their experience. Conversations about the war occurred, but they were often brief and speculative, shaped by limited information and the absence of direct impact. The independence of the American magical community played a significant role in maintaining this distance. Unlike Europe, where historical ties created a closer connection between institutions, North America operated within its own framework, guided by its own systems of governance. This separation allowed Ilvermorny to continue its work without becoming directly involved in events abroad, reinforcing the sense that each region managed its own affairs. Faculty members ensured that this independence was preserved, maintaining a clear focus on the school's primary purpose. While they remained informed about global developments, they did not allow these developments to disrupt the educational environment. Protective measures were considered and, where necessary, implemented quietly, integrated into existing systems rather than introduced as visible changes. This approach allowed the school to remain prepared without altering the experience of its students. The environment of Ilvermorny itself contributed to this sense of continuity. The school's location, concealed within the natural landscape of Mount Greylock, provided both physical and symbolic separation from the wider world. Students moved through their days within a setting that felt stable and contained, where the progression of time was marked by lessons, seasons, and personal growth rather than by external events. Interactions between students continued to develop in familiar ways. Friendships were formed, shaped by shared experiences and the challenges of learning magic. Rivalries emerged, often centered on academic performance or house identity. Yet these dynamics remained consistent with previous years. The presence of distant conflict did not alter these relationships, which were grounded in the immediate realities of student life. Communication with other schools remained limited, reflecting the broader pattern of the magical world. While Ilvermorny maintained awareness of institutions such as Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, direct interaction was rare. The absence of frequent exchange reinforced the sense that each school operated within its own sphere, connected in principle but separate in practice. News of Voldemort's activities reached Ilvermorny as part of this network, filtered through official channels rather than personal experience. As the conflict in Britain intensified, there was a gradual increase in awareness among those responsible for maintaining magical order. The Magical Congress remained attentive, ensuring that any potential impact on North America would be addressed. This vigilance, however, did not translate into immediate changes within the school. Ilvermorny continued to operate according to its established patterns, preserving the stability that defined its educational environment. For students nearing the end of their studies, the confirmation of Voldemort's return introduced a subtle shift in perspective. As they prepared to enter the wider magical world, they became more aware of the complexities that existed beyond their immediate surroundings. The knowledge that conflict persisted in other regions encouraged a more thoughtful approach to their future roles. Though it did not overshadow the achievements of their education, younger students remained largely unaffected by these considerations. Their focus continued to be on their own development, on mastering spells, understanding theory, and navigating the social structure of the school. The environment provided them with a sense of security that allowed them to grow without the burden of external uncertainty. In this way, Ilvermorny navigated the period of Voldemort's return with a quiet consistency that reflected its traditions. The school acknowledged the reality of the situation, maintained awareness of global developments, and ensured that protective measures were in place. At the same time, it preserved the conditions necessary for education, allowing students to continue their learning without disruption. The balance between awareness and independence defined the institution's response. It remained connected to the wider magical world through communication and observation, yet it did not allow external events to dictate its course. This approach ensured that Ilvermorny continued to function as a place of learning, guided by its own principles and its own understanding of stability. And so, while the conflict in Britain became more pronounced, Ilvermorny remained steady, its halls filled with the quiet progression of education, its students moving forward through time within a system that endured, shaped by independence and sustained by continuity. Castelobruxo remained one of the least affected institutions during the period when Voldemort's return became widely acknowledged across parts of the magical world. Its location, deep within the Amazon rainforest, created a form of separation that was both physical and cultural, shaping an environment where external developments arrived slowly and often without urgency. By the time confirmation of renewed conflict in Britain reached the school, it was understood as something distant, significant in its own region but not immediately relevant to the rhythms of life within the forest. The structure of education at Castelobruxo continued without interruption, guided by traditions that emphasized connection to the natural world. Students spent much of their time engaging directly with their surroundings, studying magical plants and creatures in an environment that required patience and careful observation. This focus created a steady progression of learning, where each lesson built upon experience rather than reaction to external events. The presence of distant conflict did not alter this structure, as the priorities of the school remained grounded in its immediate environment. Faculty members were aware of the developments abroad, receiving information through official channels connected to the Brazilian Ministry of Magic. These reports were considered within a broader context, allowing instructors to understand the situation without allowing it to disrupt their responsibilities. Discussions of Voldemort's return, when they occurred, were often limited to advanced students, framed as part of a wider understanding of magical history rather than as an immediate concern. Protective measures at Castelobruxo had long been shaped by the challenges of its environment. The rainforest itself required constant attention, with enchantments designed to conceal the school and protect it from both magical and non-magical intrusion. These systems were maintained as part of the institution's foundation, and while they may have been reviewed in light of global developments, they did not require significant alteration. The school's existing structure provided a level of security that allowed it to remain stable even as uncertainty grew elsewhere. For students, daily life continued with a sense of continuity that reflected the natural cycles around them. Lessons extended beyond enclosed spaces, often taking place within the forest itself, where the study of magic was inseparable from the study of the environment. This approach required focus and adaptability, encouraging students to respond to immediate conditions rather than distant events. The war in Britain, though acknowledged, did not enter into these experiences in a way that altered their understanding of magic or their place within the world. The distance between Castelobruxo and European magical institutions also limited the flow of detailed information. While major developments were communicated, the nuances of the conflict were often lost in transmission, leaving only a general awareness of what was occurring. Students might hear references to Voldemort's return, but these references lacked the depth and immediacy that would make them central to daily conversation. As a result, the situation remained abstract, something understood in outline rather than in detail. Interactions between students continued to develop in familiar ways, shaped by shared experiences within the school's unique environment. The study of magical flora and fauna, often required cooperation, fostering a sense of community that was grounded in practical necessity. These relationships provided a focus that remained consistent, allowing students to progress through their education without being distracted by events beyond their immediate surrounding. The leadership of Castelobruxo ensured that this sense of stability was preserved. Decisions were made with the goal of maintaining continuity, allowing the school to function according to its established patterns. While awareness of global events informed certain considerations, it did not lead to visible changes within the institution. The emphasis remained on providing a consistent educational experience, one that prepared students for their roles within their own communities. Among those nearing the end of their studies, there was a gradual increase in awareness of the wider magical world. As students prepared to leave the structured environment of the school, they began to consider the implications of events occurring beyond their region. The knowledge of Voldemort's return introduced a sense of complexity, encouraging a broader understanding of how magical societies interacted. This awareness, however, developed slowly, integrated into their education rather than imposed upon it. For younger students, the experience remained largely unchanged. Their focus continued to be on learning, on understanding the principles of magic, and on navigating the challenges of their environment. The stability of the school provided a framework within which they could grow, allowing them to develop their abilities without the burden of external uncertainty. The rainforest itself played a central role in maintaining this continuity. Students learned to observe patterns, to respond to changes in their environment, and to understand the interconnected nature of the world around them. This perspective shaped their understanding of magic, reinforcing the idea that it was part of a larger system rather than an isolated force. As the conflict in Britain continued to evolve, Castelobruxo remained steady, its structure unchanged by events that did not directly reach its boundaries. The school continued to educate its students according to its traditions, maintaining a balance between awareness and independence. The presence of global instability did not disrupt its core purpose, allowing it to function as it always had. In this way, Castelobruxo demonstrated how distance and environment could shape the experience of global events. The school did not ignore the reality of Voldemort's return, but it did not allow it to define its identity. Instead, it remained focused on its own systems, guided by the rhythms of the forest and the traditions that had sustained it over time. Students who passed through its halls during this period carried with them an understanding of magic that reflected this stability. They had learned to engage with the world directly, to observe and adapt, and to maintain balance within their own practice. Their perspective on the wider magical world was shaped by distance, allowing them to view events as part of a larger system rather than as immediate disruptions. And so, while the conflict in Britain grew more pronounced, Castelobruxo continued its quiet progression, its students moving forward through their education within a system that remained rooted in continuity, shaped by environment and sustained by a steady sense of independence. Mahoutokoro continued its structured progression during the period when the wider magical world began to recognize the return of Voldemort with greater certainty. The earlier uncertainty had settled into a clearer understanding, yet within the school, this shift was absorbed in a measured and controlled way. The distance from Britain, combined with the disciplined nature of the institution, allowed events to be acknowledged without disrupting the established rhythm of education. Information reached Mahoutokoro through official channels, carried by the Japanese Ministry of Magic, and evaluated before being shared within the school. Faculty members received these reports first, ensuring that any response was guided by clarity rather than speculation. When knowledge of Voldemort's return was gradually introduced into the educational environment, it was framed within a broader context, presented as part of the ongoing history of the magical world, rather than as an immediate source of concern. The structure of Mahoutokoro supported this approach. Students advanced through clearly defined stages, each marked by consistent expectations and visible indicators of progress. Their focus remained on mastering their abilities, refining their control, and understanding the principles that govern their magic. This emphasis on steady development created an environment where external events, while recognized, did not alter the course of daily life. Lessons continued with precision, guided by instructors who maintained a careful balance between awareness and stability. In subjects related to defense and responsibility, there were subtle shifts in emphasis, encouraging students to consider the broader implications of magical power. These discussions did not center on Voldemort directly, but they reflected an understanding that the world beyond the school could change in ways that required preparation. The goal remained consistent: to develop skill without introducing unnecessary disruption. Among the students, awareness of the conflict varied according to age and experience. Older students, particularly those nearing the completion of their studies, were more likely to recognize the significance of Voldemort's return. Their education had reached a stage where broader understanding was expected, and they engaged with this knowledge in a measured way. Younger students, by contrast, remained focused on their immediate development, their understanding shaped by the structured progression of their lessons rather than by distant events. The cultural framework of Mahoutokoro reinforced this balance. Students were taught to maintain composure, to approach challenges with discipline, and to avoid unnecessary reaction. This perspective influenced how they interpreted information about the wider world. Reports of conflict were understood within a system that valued control, allowing students to process such information without being unsettled by it. The emphasis on internal stability provided a foundation that supported this approach. The physical environment of the school contributed to this sense of continuity. Situated on a remote island, surrounded by water and separated from larger populations, Mahoutokoro existed within a contained space where the progression of time was marked by natural cycles rather than external events. Seasonal changes, shifts in weather, and the steady advancement of students through their stages of education created a rhythm that remained consistent regardless of developments elsewhere. Faculty members maintained awareness of global events while ensuring that the educational structure remained intact. Protective measures, where necessary, were considered and integrated into existing systems without drawing attention to their purpose. The school's emphasis on order and discipline allowed these adjustments to occur quietly, preserving the environment experienced by students. This approach ensured that the institution remained prepared without altering its visible stability. Communication with other magical schools remained limited, consistent with the broader pattern of the time. While Mahoutokoro was aware of developments at institutions such as Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, direct interaction was rare. Information was exchanged through official channels, maintaining awareness without creating dependence. This separation reinforced the sense that each school operated within its own framework, connected but not immediately influenced by others. As Voldemort's influence continued to grow within Britain, the wider magical world began to adjust to the reality of his return. Within Mahoutokoro, this adjustment remained subtle, reflected in an increased awareness rather than a visible change. Students continued their studies, guided by a system that prioritized consistency and control. The presence of distant conflict did not alter their progression, which remained steady and predictable. For those approaching the end of their education, the knowledge of global instability introduced a quiet shift in perspective. As they prepared to leave the structured environment of the school, they began to consider the broader context in which they would apply their skills. The understanding that the magical world could experience disruption encouraged a more reflective approach to their future roles. Though it did not overshadow the achievements of their training, younger students remained largely unaffected by these considerations. Their focus continued to be on mastering the fundamentals of magic, progressing through stages that required attention and discipline. The stability of the school provided a framework within which they could grow, allowing them to develop their abilities without the burden of external uncertainty. In this way, Mahoutokoro navigated the period of Voldemort's confirmed return with a consistency that reflected its traditions. The school acknowledged the presence of change within the wider world, maintained awareness of developments, and ensured that its systems remained secure. At the same time, it preserved the conditions necessary for education, allowing students to continue their learning without disruption. The balance between awareness and discipline defined the institution's response. It neither ignored the reality of the situation nor allowed it to dominate the experience of those within its walls. Instead, it remained steady, guided by principles that emphasized control, responsibility, and gradual progression. And so, while the magical world beyond Britain adjusted to the return of a familiar threat, Mahoutokoro continued its work, its students moving forward through time within a system that endured, shaped by structure and sustained by a quiet and deliberate sense of stability. Uagadu continued to develop within its own framework during the period when the wider magical world adjusted to the confirmed return of Voldemort. The earlier uncertainty had settled into recognition in some regions, yet within the mountains where the school stood, this change was absorbed without disruption. The institution had long operated with a strong sense of independence, shaped by traditions that emphasized internal balance rather than external alignment. This independence allowed it to maintain continuity, even as awareness of distant conflict became more defined. Information reached Uagadu through indirect channels, often carried by representatives of magical governance within the region. These reports were considered carefully by faculty members, who evaluated their significance within the broader context of magical history. The return of a powerful wizard in another part of the world was not dismissed, but it was not treated as an immediate influence on the structure of the school. Instead, it became part of a wider understanding, integrated into discussions that emphasized patterns rather than isolated events. The approach to education at Uagadu reinforced this perspective. Students were taught to engage with magic as a force that required awareness, discipline, and balance. The emphasis on wandless magic placed responsibility directly within the individual, encouraging a level of control that extended beyond technique. This focus on internal mastery shaped how students interpreted information about the wider world. Reports of instability were understood as examples of imbalance, situations where the misuse of magic had disrupted the natural order. Daily life within the school continued with a steady rhythm. Lessons were conducted in open environments where students observed and interacted with their surroundings, developing skills that required both concentration and adaptability. The absence of rigid boundaries between classroom and environment created a sense of continuity, allowing education to unfold as part of a larger system rather than as a separate activity. Within this framework, the presence of distant conflict did not alter the progression of learning. Faculty members maintained this stability by ensuring that the curriculum remained consistent. While they remained informed about global developments, their primary responsibility was to guide students through a system that had been refined over generations. Discussions of Voldemort's return, when they occurred, were framed within a broader understanding of magical responsibility, encouraging students to consider the consequences of power without focusing on specific individuals or events. Among the students, awareness of the situation varied. Those with connections to other regions or with a particular interest in magical history were more likely to recognize the significance of the developments in Britain. Others remained focused on their studies, their understanding shaped by the immediate demands of their education. Conversations about the wider magical world occurred, but they were often brief and reflective, rather than driven by urgency. The independence of Uagadu from European magical traditions contributed to this measured response. The school's methods and philosophies had developed within a different context, one that did not rely on the same structures of governance or communication. This separation allowed it to maintain its own course, guided by principles that emphasized continuity and self-reliance. The return of Voldemort, while acknowledged, did not require a shift in these principles. The physical environment of the school also played a role in maintaining this sense of continuity. The mountains, with their shifting mists and changing light, created an atmosphere where attention was directed toward the immediate surroundings. Students learned to observe patterns, to respond to subtle changes, and to maintain awareness of the forces that shaped their environment. This perspective encouraged a focus on present conditions rather than distant uncertainties, reinforcing the stability of their experience. Communication with other magical institutions remained limited, consistent with the broader structure of the magical world. While Uagadu was recognized as one of the major schools, its interactions with others were infrequent, often occurring through formal channels rather than direct contact. This limited exchange of information contributed to the sense that each institution operated within its own sphere, connected but not dependent on one another. As the situation in Britain continued to develop, there was a gradual increase in awareness among those responsible for maintaining magical order within the region. This awareness did not translate into immediate changes within the school, but it did influence the considerations of its leadership. Protective measures, where necessary, were reviewed and integrated into existing systems, ensuring that the institution remained secure without altering its visible structure. For students approaching the end of their education, the knowledge of global instability introduced a quiet expansion of perspective. As they prepared to enter the wider magical world, they began to consider how their skills might be applied beyond their immediate environment. The understanding that conflict could arise in distant regions encouraged a more thoughtful approach to their future roles, though it did not disrupt the steady progression of their studies. Younger students remained largely unaffected by these considerations. Their focus continued to be on mastering the principles of wandless magic, developing control, and understanding the balance that defined their approach to magic. The stability of the school provided a framework within which they could grow, allowing them to develop their abilities without the influence of external uncertainty. In this way, Uagadu navigated the period of Voldemort's confirmed return with a consistency that reflected its traditions. The school acknowledged the presence of change within the wider magical world, maintained awareness of developments, and ensured that its systems remained intact. At the same time, it preserved the conditions necessary for education, allowing students to continue their learning without disruption. The balance between awareness and independence defined the institution's response. It remained connected to the wider magical world through knowledge and observation, yet it did not allow external events to dictate its course. This approach ensured that Uagadu continued to function as a place of learning, guided by its own principles and sustained by a steady sense of continuity. And so, while the magical world beyond Britain adjusted to the reality of Voldemort's return, Uagadu remained steady, its students moving forward through their education within a system that endured, shaped by balance, and sustained by a quiet and deliberate independence. Communication between wizarding governments operated within a system that was structured yet deliberately measured, shaped by the need to balance awareness with stability. Unlike the non-magical world, where information could spread rapidly and without control, the magical community relied on methods that emphasized verification, discretion, and careful distribution. During the period of Voldemort's return, this system became increasingly important, as ministries worked to understand the situation while avoiding unnecessary disruption. The primary framework for international communication was maintained through the International Confederation of Wizards, which served as a point of coordination between different magical governments. This organization did not function as a central authority, but rather as a means of facilitating dialogue and cooperation. Each ministry retained its independence, making decisions based on its own priorities while remaining informed about developments in other regions. This structure allowed for a degree of consistency, though it also introduced delays, as information moved through multiple layers before reaching its final destination. Messages between ministries were often carried through secure magical channels, designed to ensure both accuracy and confidentiality. Owls, enchanted correspondence, and other forms of magical communication were used, each with its own limitations. While these methods were reliable, they were not instantaneous, and the process of verification required additional time. As a result, information about Voldemort's return did not spread uniformly. Some regions became aware of the situation earlier than others, depending on their proximity to Britain and the strength of their diplomatic connections. The content of these communications was carefully controlled. Ministries were responsible not only for gathering information, but for determining how it should be presented to their own communities. Reports were often summarized, emphasizing key details while omitting elements that might create confusion or concern. This approach ensured that the information remained clear, but it also meant that certain nuances were lost in transmission. By the time news reached schools and local communities, it had often been shaped by multiple layers of interpretation. In Britain, where the events were unfolding directly, communication carried a greater sense of urgency. The Ministry of Magic worked to manage the flow of information both within the country and beyond its borders, though its efforts were not always consistent. Outside Britain, ministries approached the situation with caution, seeking confirmation before taking action. This difference in perspective contributed to a gradual recognition of Voldemort's return, rather than an immediate global response. At institutions such as Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, information from their respective ministries arrived with a degree of delay, allowing faculty members to assess its significance before sharing it more broadly. This process ensured that students were not exposed to incomplete or uncertain reports. Instead, they received a more stable understanding of events, one that reflected the conclusions reached by their governing authorities rather than the uncertainties of ongoing development. In more distant regions, including North America, Africa, and parts of Asia, the process of communication introduced additional layers of separation. Ministries in these areas relied on both direct contact with Britain and the broader network of the International Confederation. The combination of these sources provided a more comprehensive view, though it also required careful interpretation. Information was cross-referenced, verified, and then distributed in a manner that aligned with local priorities. The need for secrecy further influenced how communication was handled. The Statute of Secrecy required that all magical activity remain concealed from non-magical populations, and this extended to the management of information about global events. Ministries had to ensure that their communications did not create risks that might expose their world. This requirement added complexity to the process, as messages had to be both secure and discreet, limiting the speed at which they could be transmitted. Within schools, the effect of this system was a steady, controlled flow of information. Students were not immediately aware of every development, nor were they expected to be. Instead, knowledge was introduced gradually, often filtered through the understanding of their instructors. This approach allowed schools to maintain a stable environment, where education could continue without interruption, even as the wider world experienced uncertainty. Faculty members played a key role in interpreting and conveying this information. They acted as intermediaries between the decisions of ministries and the experience of students, ensuring that knowledge was presented in a way that aligned with the needs of the educational environment. This responsibility required careful judgment, as they balanced the importance of awareness with the need to preserve calm. The structure of communication also influenced how quickly different regions adapted to the reality of Voldemort's return. In areas with closer ties to Britain, recognition occurred more rapidly, leading to earlier consideration of protective measures. In more distant regions, the process was slower, allowing institutions to observe developments before responding. This variation created a staggered pattern of awareness, where the global understanding of the situation emerged gradually rather than all at once. Despite these differences, the system of communication ensured that no part of the magical world remained entirely isolated. Information, though delayed and filtered, continued to move across regions, connecting institutions and governments in a shared awareness of events. This connection, while not immediate, provided a foundation for coordinated understanding, allowing each region to respond in its own way while remaining part of a larger system. For students, the impact of this communication was often subtle. They experienced the results of decisions rather than the process itself, receiving information that had already been shaped by multiple layers of interpretation. This created a sense of stability, as they were not exposed to the uncertainties that accompanied the early stages of the situation. Instead, they encountered a more defined narrative, one that allowed them to understand events without being unsettled by them. In this way, communication between wizarding governments functioned as a mechanism of balance, ensuring that knowledge was shared while preserving the conditions necessary for continuity. It allowed the magical world to remain informed without becoming fragmented, maintaining a connection between regions that might otherwise have remained separate. As Voldemort's influence continued to grow within Britain, this system remained in place, guiding the flow of information across the world. It did not eliminate uncertainty, nor did it create uniformity in response, but it provided a framework within which each institution could navigate the situation. And within that framework, the steady progression of magical education continued, supported by a system that valued both awareness and restraint. Secrecy formed a constant foundation beneath every system of magical education, shaping not only where schools were placed, but how they operated from one day to the next. The Statute of Secrecy, established to protect the existence of the magical world from non-magical discovery, was not simply a rule that existed in the background. It influenced decisions at every level, from the construction of school grounds to the structure of daily routines, ensuring that magical communities remained unseen while continuing to function without interruption. Each school adapted this principle to its own environment. Hogwarts, hidden within the Scottish Highlands, relied on layers of enchantment that concealed its presence and altered the perception of anyone who approached without magical awareness. Beauxbatons used a combination of natural isolation and refined magical concealment, blending its surroundings with an appearance that could not be easily interpreted by those outside its world. Durmstrang, by contrast, embraced secrecy through obscurity, limiting knowledge of its location even within the magical community itself, reducing the risk of exposure by restricting access. In regions beyond Europe, the approach to secrecy often reflected the landscape more directly. Castelobruxo's position within the Amazon rainforest allowed it to remain hidden within an environment that was already vast and difficult to navigate. Uagadu, set within mountainous terrain, relied on elevation, distance, and enchantment to ensure that it remained unseen. Mahoutokoro, situated on a remote island, used both physical separation and carefully maintained spells to create a boundary between itself and the non-magical world. These methods were not static. They required continuous attention, maintained by faculty members and supported by the broader systems of magical governance. Protective enchantments were reviewed and reinforced over time, ensuring that they adapted to changes in the surrounding environment. This maintenance was often invisible to students, forming part of the background structure that allowed them to move through their education without awareness of the complexity involved in keeping their world concealed. The enforcement of secrecy also influenced how students were taught to use magic. From an early stage, they were instructed not only in technique, but in restraint. Spells were practiced within controlled environments, where their effects could be observed and managed without risk of exposure. Outside these spaces, students were guided in understanding the importance of discretion, learning when and where magic could be used safely. This aspect of education was consistent across all schools, regardless of regional differences, reflecting a shared understanding that secrecy was essential to the survival of the magical community. During the period of Voldemort's return, the importance of secrecy became more pronounced, though this emphasis was not always visible within schools. Ministries of magic, aware of the potential for instability, worked to ensure that any increase in magical activity did not draw attention from the non-magical world. This required careful coordination, as events within one region could have unintended effects elsewhere. Communication between governments ensured that information was shared, but always with consideration for how it might be contained. Within schools, this translated into a reinforcement of existing practices rather than the introduction of new ones. Students continued their lessons as they always had, but instructors remained attentive to the potential for disruption. In subjects related to magical law and responsibility, there were subtle reminders of the importance of maintaining secrecy, framed within the broader context of ethical practice. These reminders did not focus on specific events, but they reflected an awareness that the balance between visibility and concealment could not be taken for granted. The diversity of magical cultures also influenced how secrecy was understood and maintained. In some regions, there was a strong emphasis on strict separation between magical and non-magical communities, with clear boundaries that were rarely crossed. In others, the relationship was more fluid, requiring a different approach to concealment. Schools adapted to these variations, ensuring that their students were prepared to navigate the specific conditions of their own societies. For students, the concept of secrecy often existed as a background principle rather than an immediate concern. They understood its importance, but their daily experience was shaped more by the process of learning than by the enforcement of rules. The stability of their environment allowed them to focus on developing their abilities, trusting that the systems in place would protect them from unintended exposure. This trust was a result of the consistent application of secrecy across generations, creating an environment where it was rarely questioned. Faculty members, however, remained closely engaged with the practical aspects of maintaining this balance. Their responsibilities extended beyond teaching, encompassing the ongoing management of protective measures and the interpretation of guidance from magical authorities. During periods of uncertainty, such as the return of Voldemort, this role became more significant, requiring careful attention to ensure that any changes in the wider world did not compromise the security of the school. The existence of smaller and unregistered educational systems added another layer to this complexity. These communities, often operating outside formal oversight, maintained their own methods of secrecy, shaped by local conditions. While they were less visible within the broader structure of magical education, they were still bound by the same underlying principle, ensuring that their activities remained concealed. This shared commitment created a network of practices that extended across the entire magical world, connecting different systems through a common goal. As the situation in Britain continued to develop, the global system of secrecy remained intact, providing a foundation that allowed schools to continue their work without interruption. The return of Voldemort, while significant, did not alter the fundamental importance of this principle. Instead, it reinforced it, reminding magical communities of the need to remain vigilant, even in times of relative stability. The balance between visibility and concealment defined much of the structure of magical education. Schools existed as places of learning, yet they were also carefully hidden, their presence known only to those who belonged within them. This dual nature required constant attention, ensuring that knowledge could be passed on without risking exposure. In this way, secrecy was not simply a rule to be followed, but a condition that shaped every aspect of the magical world. It allowed schools to exist, to teach, and to continue their traditions across generations, even as events beyond their walls suggested that change was always possible. For most students outside Britain, the awareness of the war developed slowly and unevenly, shaped by distance, age, and the way information was shared within their schools. Unlike those at Hogwarts, who experienced events directly, students in other institutions encountered the conflict through fragments of knowledge, often presented without urgency. This created a form of understanding that was partial, where the existence of the war was known, but its details remained unclear. In classrooms, the subject was not part of formal instruction. Lessons continued to focus on established disciplines, guided by curricula that had been in place long before the conflict began. Professors rarely shifted the direction of their teaching to address current events directly, choosing instead to maintain consistency. When references to the war appeared, they were often indirect, framed within broader discussions of magical history or responsibility. This approach allowed students to recognize that something significant was occurring without disrupting the structure of their education. Among older students, there was a greater tendency to seek out information. Those with family connections to other regions, particularly to Britain, were more likely to hear detailed accounts. Letters, conversations during holidays, and personal exchanges provided a deeper understanding, though even these sources were often limited by the need for caution. Information carried in this way was sometimes incomplete, shaped by the perspective of the person sharing it. As a result, discussions among students often reflected uncertainty as they tried to interpret events that were not fully visible to them. Younger students, by contrast, were less engaged with the situation. Their focus remained on their immediate environment, on learning spells, understanding theory, and adjusting to the routines of school life. The war existed as something distant, mentioned occasionally but not central to their experience. For many, it was simply part of the background, something that belonged to another place and another group of people. In schools such as Beauxbatons and Ilvermorny, the controlled flow of information ensured that awareness developed gradually. Faculty members determined how much students needed to know, presenting information in a way that aligned with their level of understanding. This approach prevented the spread of rumor and speculation, though it also meant that students often lacked a complete picture of what was happening. Their knowledge was shaped by what they were told, as well as by what they observed in the behavior of their instructors. At Durmstrang, where independence and resilience were emphasized, students were more accustomed to interpreting information on their own. The limited communication with other institutions meant that they often relied on indirect sources, forming their own conclusions based on what little they knew. This created a different form of awareness, one that was less guided and more influenced by individual perspective. Discussions about the war, when they occurred, tended to reflect this variation, with students expressing differing views on its significance. In more distant regions, such as Castelobruxo, Uagadu, and Mahoutokoro, the separation from European events created an even greater sense of distance. Students in these schools often encountered the war as a concept rather than as a series of events. They might hear the name Voldemort mentioned in passing, or become aware that something had changed in Britain, but the details remained indistinct. Their education, shaped by local traditions and environments, did not require a detailed understanding of foreign conflicts, and so their awareness remained limited. Despite this distance, there was a gradual increase in recognition as the war continued. Reports became more consistent, and the confirmation of Voldemort's return gave structure to what had previously been uncertain. Students began to understand that the situation was not temporary, but part of a larger development within the magical world. This understanding did not lead to immediate concern, but it did create a subtle shift in perspective, particularly among those nearing the end of their education. The emotional response to this knowledge was often restrained. The structure of magical education encouraged composure, reinforcing the idea that external events should not disrupt personal development. Students learned to process information in a measured way, acknowledging its significance without allowing it to dominate their thoughts. This approach was consistent across many institutions, reflecting a shared emphasis on stability and control. Daily life within schools continued with little visible change. Classes were attended, assignments completed, and routines followed as they always had been. Friendships developed, shaped by shared experiences rather than by external events. The presence of the war did not alter these interactions, which remained grounded in the immediate realities of student life. For many, the school environment provided a sense of continuity that allowed them to focus on their own growth. There were moments, however, when the distance between knowledge and experience became more apparent. Letters from home, might carry a different tone, reflecting concern that had not been present before. Faculty members might appear more attentive, their awareness of the situation influencing their behavior in subtle ways. These changes were not always explained, but they contributed to an atmosphere where students understood that something beyond their immediate surroundings required attention. The role of magical governments in shaping awareness was significant. By controlling the flow of information, they influenced how students perceived the war. Their decisions determined what was shared and how it was presented, ensuring that knowledge remained structured and consistent. This approach helped to maintain stability within schools, though it also meant that students' understanding was often limited to what was considered appropriate for them to know. For those preparing to leave school, this limited understanding began to expand as they approached the wider world. The knowledge that conflict existed elsewhere encouraged them to consider their future roles within a more complex system. They began to recognize that their education had prepared them not only for personal development, but for participation in a world that could be shaped by events beyond their control. In this way, students' awareness of the war developed in layers, shaped by distance, communication, and the structure of their education. It was neither immediate nor complete, but it was sufficient to create an understanding that extended beyond their immediate experience. The war remained something they knew of rather than something they lived through, a presence that existed alongside their studies without defining them. The magical world, as experienced by these students, continued to move forward with a steady rhythm. Their education provided a framework within which they could grow, allowing them to navigate uncertainty without losing stability. And within that framework, their awareness of the wider world expanded gradually, preparing them for a future in which that world would become more immediate. Magical teaching did not follow a single model across the world. Each school developed its own approach, shaped by history, environment, and the needs of the communities it served. These differences were not treated as divisions, but as natural variations within a wider system. Students learned similar foundations, yet the way those foundations were presented, practiced, and understood could differ in subtle but meaningful ways. In Europe, institutions such as Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang shared a common lineage, drawing from traditions that had developed over centuries of contact. Even within this shared history, their approaches were distinct. At Hogwarts, instruction balanced theory and practice, allowing students to explore different branches of magic while maintaining a structured progression. Beauxbatons emphasized refinement, encouraging precision and composure in the use of spells. Durmstrang focused on discipline and resilience, shaping students through an environment that required independence and control. These differences influenced not only how magic was taught, but how it was understood. At Hogwarts, students were encouraged to develop a broad range of skills, exploring different disciplines before specializing. At Beauxbatons, the emphasis on presentation shaped an understanding of magic as something to be performed with elegance. At Durmstrang, the focus on strength and endurance created a perspective where magic was viewed as a tool that required careful management of both power and consequence. Outside Europe, the variations became more pronounced. Ilvermorny, shaped by the history of North American magical communities, combined elements of European tradition with practices that had developed independently. Its system encouraged balance, allowing students to explore their abilities within a framework that valued both individual development and collective understanding. The presence of diverse cultural influences created an environment where multiple perspectives could exist alongside one another. In South America, Castelobruxo approached magical teaching through direct interaction with the natural world. The surrounding rainforest provided a setting where magic was studied as part of a larger system, connected to plants, creatures, and the environment itself. Students learned through observation and experience, developing an understanding that extended beyond formal instruction. This approach created a sense of continuity between the act of learning and the world in which that learning took place. At Uagadu, the emphasis on wandless magic represented a fundamental difference in teaching philosophy. Students were trained to channel magic through their own bodies, relying on intention and discipline rather than external tools. This method required a deep understanding of control, as the absence of a wand placed greater responsibility on the individual. The result was a form of education that focused on internal mastery, shaping how students approached both their abilities and their place within the magical world. Mahoutokoro, with its structured progression, emphasized gradual development and clear markers of achievement. Students advanced through stages that required consistent effort, reinforcing a sense of discipline and responsibility. The visual indicators of progress, reflected in the changing appearance of their robes, created a tangible connection between effort and result. This system encouraged students to approach their education with patience, understanding that advancement was earned over time. These variations extended beyond methods of teaching into the broader philosophy of each institution. Some schools emphasized independence, encouraging students to take responsibility for their own development. Others focused on collective learning, where cooperation played a central role in education. These approaches influenced how students interacted with one another, shaping the social structure of each school as well as its academic environment. Despite these differences, there remained a shared foundation that connected all forms of magical teaching. Students were expected to develop control over their abilities, to understand the consequences of their actions, and to maintain the secrecy that protected their world. These principles provided a common framework, ensuring that regardless of where a student was educated, they would emerge with an understanding of the responsibilities that came with their abilities. During the period of Voldemort's return, these cultural differences influenced how the situation was interpreted within each school. In institutions where discipline and control were emphasized, the conflict was understood as a failure to maintain balance. In those that valued independence, it was seen as an example of power being pursued without restraint. In environments focused on harmony with the natural world, it was viewed as a disruption of a larger system. These interpretations did not lead to direct involvement, but they shaped the context in which the events were understood. Students, influenced by the systems in which they were trained, developed perspectives that reflected these differences. Their understanding of magic was shaped not only by what they learned, but by how they learned it. The methods of instruction, the values emphasized, and the environment in which they studied all contributed to the way they perceived the wider magical world. Interaction between these different approaches was limited, yet it existed in subtle ways. Events such as the Triwizard Tournament provided opportunities for students to observe alternative methods of teaching, gaining insight into perspectives that differed from their own. These experiences, though brief, contributed to a gradual awareness that magical education was not uniform, but varied according to context. For most students, however, these differences remained largely theoretical. Their daily experience was shaped by the specific environment of their own school, where routines and expectations provided a consistent framework for learning. The presence of distant conflict did not alter this framework, though it did highlight the diversity of approaches that existed across the magical world. As students progressed through their education, they carried with them the influence of these systems. Their understanding of magic, their approach to problem solving, and their interpretation of events were all shaped by the methods through which they had been taught. This diversity of perspective contributed to the complexity of the magical world, ensuring that no single viewpoint dominated. In this way, cultural differences in magical teaching created a network of varied yet interconnected systems. Each school maintained its own identity, preserving traditions that reflected its history and environment, while contributing to a broader understanding of magic. These differences did not divide the magical world, but enriched it, allowing for a range of approaches that could adapt to changing circumstances. And so, as the wider world adjusted to the presence of conflict, the diversity of magical teaching remained a constant, shaping how each institution understood and responded to events. Within this diversity, the steady progression of education continued, guided by traditions that ensured continuity, even in the presence of change. As the conflict in Britain moved toward its final phase, awareness across the wider magical world became more defined, though it remained shaped by distance and interpretation. Reports grew more consistent, carrying a clearer picture of events, yet they still arrived through the same measured channels that had governed communication from the beginning. Exchanged information with greater frequency, confirming developments and adjusting their understanding as the situation unfolded. Within schools outside Britain, this increase in clarity did not lead to visible disruption, but it did introduce a quiet sense of attentiveness. Faculty members became more aware of the possibility that the conflict might have broader implications, even if those implications were not immediate. Discussions among instructors reflected this awareness, focusing on how to maintain stability while remaining prepared for change. These considerations remained largely unseen by students, integrated into decisions that preserved the continuity of education. At Beauxbatons, the final year of the war was marked by a continuation of established routines, though with a subtle reinforcement of protective measures. The chateau remained a place of calm, its environment unchanged in appearance, yet maintained with increased attention to detail. Students continued their lessons, guided by instructors who emphasized control and awareness. The presence of distant conflict did not alter the structure of their education, but it was acknowledged as part of a broader context in which their skills might eventually be applied. Durmstrang experienced a similar balance between continuity and awareness. The school's emphasis on discipline and independence allowed it to absorb external developments without visible change. Students continued their studies within an environment that required resilience, while faculty remained attentive to the evolving situation beyond their borders. The increasing clarity of reports did not lead to immediate action, but it reinforced the understanding that the magical world was undergoing a period of instability. At Ilvermorny, the final stage of the war was monitored closely by the Magical Congress, which maintained communication with British authorities. Within the school, this monitoring translated into a continued emphasis on preparedness without disruption. Lessons proceeded as they always had, though subjects related to defense and responsibility carried a greater sense of relevance. Students were encouraged to understand the broader implications of their abilities, even if the conflict itself remained distant from their daily lives. In more remote institutions, such as Castelobruxo, Uagadu, and Mahoutokoro, the final year of the war was experienced with a similar sense of separation. Information arrived with greater clarity than before, allowing faculty to develop a more complete understanding of events. This understanding did not alter the structure of education, but it did influence the context in which certain topics were discussed. Students were made aware, in measured ways, that the magical world was facing challenges that extended beyond their immediate environment. Protective measures across these institutions were reviewed with increased care. Enchantments that had long ensured the security of school grounds were maintained with particular attention, ensuring that they remained effective under changing conditions. These adjustments were made quietly, without drawing attention to their purpose, allowing students to continue their routines without disruption. The emphasis remained on preserving the environment of learning, even as the wider world approached a moment of resolution. Among students, awareness of the situation reached its highest point during this period, though it remained filtered through the same systems that had shaped it from the beginning. Older students, particularly those preparing to leave school, recognized that the conflict was approaching a conclusion. Their understanding was informed by more consistent reports, allowing them to form a clearer picture of what was occurring. Younger students, while aware of the situation, remained focused on their studies, their experience defined more by the structure of their education than by external events. The emotional response to this increased awareness remained controlled. The culture of magical education encouraged composure, reinforcing the idea that even significant events should be approached with balance. Students processed information with a sense of distance, understanding its importance without allowing it to disrupt their focus. This approach allowed schools to maintain stability, even as the situation beyond their walls grew more intense. Communication between magical governments continued to play a central role in shaping this period. Ministries exchanged information with greater urgency, confirming developments and preparing for the potential outcomes of the conflict. This coordination ensured that no region remained entirely unaware of the situation, while still allowing each to respond according to its own priorities. The result was a global awareness that was shared, yet experienced differently depending on location. For those within educational institutions, the final year of the war was characterized by this balance between awareness and continuity. The structure of learning remained intact, providing a stable framework within which students could continue their development. At the same time, the knowledge that the magical world was approaching a moment of change created a subtle shift in perspective, particularly among those nearing the end of their education. Faculty members guided students through this period with careful attention, ensuring that the presence of external conflict did not overshadow the purpose of their instruction. Lessons remained focused on skill and understanding, while incorporating a broader awareness of responsibility. This approach prepared students for a world that might require greater awareness, without disrupting the steady progression of their education. As the conflict in Britain moved toward its conclusion, the wider magical world remained steady, its institutions continuing to function according to their established patterns. The increasing clarity of events did not lead to immediate change, but it did create a sense of anticipation, an understanding that the outcome would carry significance beyond its point of origin. And so, within the walls of schools across the world, life continued with a quiet consistency, even as the final stages of the war unfolded elsewhere. Students moved through their lessons, faculty maintained their guidance, and the structure of magical education endured, providing stability in a time that, though distant, was drawing toward a moment of resolution. The Battle of Hogwarts marked a turning point that was recognized across the magical world, though its impact was experienced differently depending on distance and perspective. Within Britain, it brought a sudden and decisive end to the conflict that had been building for years. Beyond its borders, the event was understood through the same channels that had carried earlier reports, though now with a clarity that left little room for uncertainty. The fall of Voldemort was confirmed, and with it came the recognition that a period of instability had reached its conclusion. Information about the battle spread through ministries and international networks, moving outward with a sense of finality. Reports described the outcome rather than the process, focusing on the result rather than the details of how it had been achieved. This approach ensured that the significance of the event was clear, while avoiding the complexity that might have accompanied a more detailed account. By the time the news reached schools across the world, it carried a tone of resolution, presenting the battle as the closing moment of a conflict that had defined one part of the magical world. At Beauxbatons, the announcement was received with a quiet acknowledgement. Faculty members confirmed the information before sharing it with students, ensuring that the message was both accurate and measured. When it was communicated more broadly, it was presented as the conclusion of events that had remained distant throughout their duration. Students understood that something significant had occurred, though their own experience of the war had been limited. The response was calm, reflecting the institution's emphasis on composure and stability. Durmstrang interpreted the outcome within its broader understanding of magical history. The rise and fall of powerful figures was not unfamiliar, and Voldemort's defeat was seen as part of this recurring pattern. While the scale of the conflict was acknowledged, the response within the school remained controlled. Students continued their studies, their routines unchanged, as the event was absorbed into the institution's existing framework of knowledge. At Ilvermorny, the confirmation of Voldemort's defeat was received through official communication from the Magical Congress. The information was verified and then shared with the school in a manner that emphasized stability. The conflict in Britain had ended, and with it, the immediate concern that it might extend beyond its original region. For students, the news represented the resolution of something they had known only from a distance. Their response was shaped by this separation, marked by interest rather than direct emotional involvement. In more distant schools, such as Castelobruxo, Uagadu, and Mahoutokoro, the impact of the battle was similarly filtered through distance. Faculty members received the information first, interpreting it within the context of their own institutions before sharing it with students. The emphasis remained on understanding the significance of the event without allowing it to disrupt the structure of education. Students learned that the conflict had ended, but the details remained abstract, their understanding shaped by the limited information available to them. The global response to the battle was characterized by a sense of relief, though this relief was more pronounced in regions that had been closer to the conflict. In more distant areas, it was accompanied by a reaffirmation of stability, a recognition that the systems that had remained intact throughout the war would continue to function. Magical governments adjusted their focus, moving from observation of conflict to the maintenance of order in its aftermath. Within schools, this transition was reflected in a continuation of routine. Lessons proceeded as they always had, guided by established curricula and the steady presence of instructors. The confirmation of Voldemort's defeat did not alter the structure of education, but it did provide a point of reference, a moment that marked the end of a period that had existed at the edges of students' awareness. Faculty members, particularly those teaching advanced subjects, incorporated this understanding into broader discussions of magical history, allowing students to place the event within a larger context. For students nearing the end of their education, the outcome of the battle carried a different significance. As they prepared to enter the wider magical world, they became more aware of the role such events played in shaping the societies they would soon join. The knowledge that a conflict of this scale had been resolved encouraged a sense of reflection, though it did not disrupt the completion of their studies. Their education continued to provide a framework within which they could understand and interpret these developments. Younger students experienced the news with less immediacy. Their understanding of the battle was shaped by the way it was presented to them, often as a distant event that had now reached its conclusion. The absence of direct involvement allowed them to process the information without disruption, maintaining their focus on the routines of school life. For them, the battle became part of the broader narrative of the magical world, something to be learned rather than experienced. The communication of the battle's outcome also reinforced the structure of international cooperation. Ministries exchanged information with clarity, ensuring that all regions were informed of the result. This coordination reflected the interconnected nature of the magical world, even as each region maintained its own independence. The sharing of this final confirmation marked a moment where the global system of communication functioned with particular clarity, providing a unified understanding of the event. Despite its significance, the Battle of Hogwarts did not redefine the structure of magical education outside Britain. Schools continued to operate according to their own traditions, maintaining the continuity that had sustained them throughout the conflict. The event was acknowledged, integrated into the broader understanding of the magical world, and then allowed to settle into history. In this way, the battle represented both an ending and a continuation. It brought a decisive close to a conflict that had shaped one region, while allowing the rest of the magical world to move forward without disruption. Students returned to their studies, faculty continued their instruction, and the steady progression of education endured. The magical world, vast and varied, absorbed this moment with a quiet balance. Each institution recognized its importance, yet maintained its own course, guided by traditions that extended beyond any single event. And within that balance, the work of teaching and learning continued, unchanged in its purpose, steady in its rhythm, and prepared to carry each new generation forward into a world that, once again, had returned to a state of calm. In the period that followed the Battle of Hogwarts, the wider magical world moved into a phase of quiet adjustment. Though for many institutions outside Britain, this adjustment was subtle. The conflict had reached its conclusion, and with that conclusion came a return to stability that, in many places, had never fully been lost. Schools that had continued their routines throughout the war now found themselves in a position where the need for awareness could gradually give way to a renewed focus on continuity. At Beauxbatons, the aftermath was marked by a steady continuation of its established traditions. The chateau remained unchanged in its appearance, its grounds maintained with the same care as before. Students resumed their studies without interruption, guided by instructors who ensured that the structure of education remained consistent. While the conclusion of the conflict was acknowledged, it did not lead to visible changes within the institution. Instead, it became part of the broader context within which students understood the world. Durmstrang experienced a similar return to routine, though within its own distinct framework. The discipline that defined the school allowed it to absorb the outcome of the war without disruption. Students continued their training, focusing on the development of their abilities within an environment that emphasized independence and control. The fall of Voldemort was understood as part of a larger pattern within magical history, and its conclusion did not alter the core principles that guided the institution. At Ilvermorny, the Magical Congress confirmed the end of the conflict and adjusted its focus toward maintaining stability in the post-war period. Within the school, this shift was reflected in a continuation of established practices. Students attended classes, completed their studies, and progressed through their education with the same steady rhythm that had defined previous years. The knowledge that the conflict had ended provided a sense of closure, though it did not change the structure of daily life. In more distant regions, such as Castelobruxo, Uagadu, and Mahoutokoro, the aftermath was experienced primarily as a reaffirmation of stability. These institutions had remained largely unaffected by the direct impact of the war, and so their response to its conclusion was measured. Faculty members acknowledged the significance of the event, but they did not alter the systems that had sustained their schools. Education continued according to established traditions, guided by principles that had proven reliable over time. For students, the end of the conflict often carried less immediacy than might be expected. Their understanding of the war had been shaped by distance, and so its conclusion was received in a similar way. It marked the end of something they had known about rather than something they had experienced. Their daily routines remained unchanged, their focus directed toward their studies and the relationships that defined their time within the school. There were, however, subtle ways in which the aftermath influenced the educational environment. In some institutions, there was an increased emphasis on reflection, particularly in subjects related to magical history and responsibility. Students were encouraged to consider the broader implications of the conflict, to understand how events in one region could shape the wider world. These discussions were measured, integrated into existing curricula, rather than introduced as separate topics, ensuring that they complemented rather than disrupted the progression of learning. Faculty members also adjusted their approach in quiet ways, maintaining awareness of the potential for future instability while preserving the conditions necessary for education. Protective measures that had been reviewed during the war remained in place, though they were no longer emphasized. The goal was to ensure that schools remained secure without creating an atmosphere defined by caution. This balance allowed institutions to move forward with confidence, guided by the knowledge that their systems had endured. Communication between magical governments shifted in tone during this period, moving from a focus on monitoring conflict to maintaining order in its aftermath. Information continued to be exchanged, though with less urgency, reflecting the return to stability. This change influenced how schools understood their place within the wider system, reinforcing the idea that they were part of a connected yet independent network. For those nearing the end of their education, the aftermath of the war provided a moment of transition. As they prepared to leave the structured environment of their schools, they did so with an awareness of the events that had shaped the world they were entering. This awareness did not disrupt their studies, but it did contribute to a broader understanding of their responsibilities as members of the magical community. Younger students, by contrast, experienced the aftermath as part of the background of their education. Their understanding of the conflict was shaped by the way it was presented to them, often as a completed chapter within magical history. Their focus remained on their own development, on mastering the skills required to progress through their studies. The physical environments of these schools continued to reinforce a sense of continuity. The grounds of Beauxbatons, the remote setting of Durmstrang, the natural surroundings of Castelobruxo, and the structured island of Mahoutokoro all provided settings that felt unchanged by external events. These environments allowed students to experience stability in a tangible way, reinforcing the idea that their education existed within a system that endured. In this way, the aftermath of the war did not bring sudden transformation to the wider system of magical education. Instead, it confirmed the resilience of that system, demonstrating that schools could continue their work even in the presence of external conflict. The conclusion of the war allowed institutions to reaffirm their purpose, returning their focus fully to the steady progression of learning. Magical world, having moved through a period of uncertainty, settled once again into a pattern of continuity. Each school maintained its traditions, its structure, and its approach to teaching, ensuring that the next generation of students would be guided through their education with the same consistency as those who came before. And so, while the conflict in Britain became part of history, the wider world of magical education continued, steady and unchanged in its purpose, carrying forward the quiet work of teaching and learning that defined it. In the years that followed the war, the long-term effects on magical education did not appear as sudden changes, but as gradual adjustments that settled into existing systems. The structure of schools remained largely intact, shaped by traditions that had endured through previous periods of uncertainty. Yet, beneath this continuity, there was a subtle shift in awareness, a recognition that events in one part of the world could carry implications beyond their immediate region. Magical institutions did not alter their core methods of teaching. Students continued to learn the same foundational disciplines, guided by curricula that had been refined over generations. The emphasis on control, responsibility, and secrecy remained central, ensuring that each new generation developed the skills necessary to maintain the stability of the magical world. However, the context within which these subjects were taught began to expand, allowing for a broader understanding of how magic functioned within a global system. At schools such as Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Ilvermorny, there was a gradual increase in the inclusion of recent history within advanced studies. The events surrounding Voldemort's rise and fall were incorporated into lessons not as isolated incidents, but as part of a larger pattern within magical society. Students were encouraged to understand how power could be shaped by belief, how communities responded to uncertainty, and how institutions maintained stability during periods of disruption. These discussions remained measured, integrated into existing subjects rather than presented as separate areas of focus. In more distant institutions, such as Castelobruxo, Uagadu, and Mahoutokoro, the influence of the war was less direct, yet it still contributed to a subtle expansion of perspective. Faculty members acknowledged that the magical world was interconnected, even if that connection was not always visible. Lessons that had previously focused on local traditions began to include references to the wider system, allowing students to recognize that their education was part of something larger. This awareness did not replace existing methods, but it added depth to them. Communication between magical governments and institutions also evolved, though not in ways that disrupted independence. The network of information that had functioned during the war remained in place, now used to maintain a steady awareness of global developments. Schools received updates with less urgency, but with a consistency that reinforced the idea that no region existed in complete isolation. This gradual exchange of information contributed to a more cohesive understanding of the magical world, even as each institution maintained its own identity. Emphasis on defensive magic and responsibility became slightly more pronounced in certain areas, particularly for older students preparing to enter the wider magical community. This was not presented as a reaction to recent events, but as an extension of existing principles. Students were taught to consider the broader implications of their abilities, to understand that magic could influence not only their immediate environment, but also the stability of the world around them. This perspective encouraged a more thoughtful approach to their development, without altering the fundamental structure of their education. For most students, however, the experience of magical education remained consistent with that of previous generations. They attended classes, practiced spells, and progressed through their studies with the same steady rhythm that had always defined school life. The changes that had occurred were often too gradual to be noticed directly, forming part of the background rather than the foreground of their experience. Faculty members played a central role in maintaining this balance between continuity and adaptation. Their approach ensured that new perspectives were introduced without disrupting established systems. They guided students through a curriculum that remained stable, while quietly incorporating a broader understanding of the magical world. This method allowed schools to evolve without appearing to change, preserving the sense of consistency that was essential to effective learning. The cultural differences between schools continued to shape how these adjustments were expressed. At institutions that emphasized discipline and structure, the changes were integrated with precision, ensuring that they aligned with existing frameworks. In schools that focused on exploration and interaction with the environment, the broader perspective was introduced through observation and experience. Each institution adapted in its own way, reflecting its traditions while responding to a shared awareness of global events. Students who graduated in the years following the war carried with them an understanding that was both familiar and expanded. Their education had provided them with the same foundational skills as those who came before, but it had also introduced them to a wider context in which those skills would be applied. They entered the magical world with a sense of continuity, yet with an awareness that the systems supporting that continuity required attention and care. The long-term effects of the war were therefore not defined by transformation, but by reinforcement. The importance of stability, of measured response, and of maintaining balance became more clearly understood, not as new ideas, but as principles that had proven their value. Magical education continued to emphasize these principles, ensuring that they remained central to the development of each new generation. In this way, the global system of magical education demonstrated its resilience. It absorbed the impact of conflict without losing its structure, adapting in subtle ways that strengthened its foundation. Schools remained places of learning, guided by traditions that had endured through change, yet capable of incorporating new understanding as it emerged. The passage of time allowed these adjustments to settle, becoming part of the steady rhythm that defined magical education. Students continued to move through their studies, guided by instructors who maintained a balance between continuity and awareness. The world beyond their classrooms remained complex, but within those classrooms, the process of learning endured, shaped by a system that had adapted without losing its identity. In the years that followed, the magical world settled into a pattern that felt both familiar and unchanged, shaped by the quiet continuation of its institutions. Schools across different regions maintained their routines, guiding new generations of students through the same processes of learning that had existed long before the events in Britain had taken place. The sense of disruption that had once defined a single part of the world did not extend into this period. Instead, it gave way to a steady rhythm that allowed education to continue without interruption. At Beauxbatons, the chateau remained a place of refinement and composure, its halls filled with students who moved through their studies with measured precision. Lessons followed established patterns, guided by instructors who ensured that each stage of learning built upon the last. The presence of past conflict existed only as part of historical understanding, integrated into advanced studies rather than influencing daily life. For most students, their experience was defined by continuity, shaped by traditions that had endured across generations. Durmstrang continued to operate within its own distinct framework, maintaining an environment where discipline and independence were central. Students trained with the same expectations that had defined the school for years, developing resilience through structured challenges. The broader events of the magical world did not alter this approach. Instead, they became part of the context within which students understood their place, reinforcing the importance of control and awareness without changing the nature of their education. At Ilvermorny, the balance between tradition and independence remained steady. Students advanced through their studies within a system that encouraged both individual growth and collective understanding. The Magical Congress maintained its oversight, ensuring that the broader structure of magical society remained stable. Within the school, life continued as it always had, guided by routines that allowed students to focus on their development without the influence of external uncertainty. In more distant regions, such as Castelobruxo, Uagadu, and Mahoutokoro, the continuation of education reflected the strength of systems that had long operated independently. The natural environments surrounding these schools continued to shape their methods of teaching, creating rhythms that remained consistent regardless of events beyond their borders. Students learned through observation, discipline, and interaction with their surroundings, developing skills that were grounded in their immediate experience. The passage of time reinforced the idea that the magical world did not revolve around a single event or a single institution. While the story of Hogwarts had drawn attention, it existed within a much larger system that continued to function with quiet consistency. Schools remained places of learning, their purpose unchanged, their structure preserved through careful attention to tradition. For students, the experience of magical education remained centered on their own progression. They attended lessons, practiced their abilities, and formed relationships that shaped their understanding of the world. The broader history of the magical community existed as a background to these experiences, providing context without defining them. Each generation moved forward with a sense of continuity, guided by the same principles that had supported those who came before. Faculty members maintained this continuity through their commitment to teaching and to the preservation of established systems. Their role ensured that knowledge was passed on without disruption, allowing the structure of education to endure. While they remained aware of the wider world, their focus remained on the students before them, guiding them through the process of learning with consistency and care. Communication between magical communities continued at a measured pace, maintaining awareness without creating dependence. The network of information that connected different regions remained intact, though it functioned with less urgency than during the years of conflict. This steady exchange reinforced the idea that the magical world was both connected and independent, a system where each part contributed to the whole without losing its identity. As new students arrived at schools across the world, they entered environments that felt stable and complete. They learned to control their magic, to understand its principles, and to navigate the responsibilities that came with it. Their education prepared them for a world that, while complex, remained structured by systems that had proven their resilience over time. The events that had once shaped the course of one region became part of the broader history that informed this education. They were studied, understood, and then placed within a larger narrative that extended beyond any single moment. In this way, the continuation of magical education reflected the enduring nature of the institutions that supported it. Schools remained steady, their purpose unchanged, their methods consistent, students moved through their studies with a sense of progression that was both personal and collective, guided by traditions that had been preserved across generations. The magical world, vast and varied, carried on with a quiet confidence, shaped not by the presence of conflict, but by the stability that followed it. And within that stability, the work of teaching and learning continued, steady and unbroken, ensuring that each new generation would find its place within a system that endured beyond any single story. The story of the magical world during these years does not rest in a single place or within a single school. It continues across many regions, shaped by institutions that remain steady even as events rise and fall around them. While one conflict drew attention and defined a moment in time, the wider system of magical education carried on, guided by traditions that did not change with circumstance. Students in distant schools moved through their lessons without interruption, learning the same principles that had been passed down for generations. Their understanding of the world grew gradually, shaped by routine rather than disruption. What happened elsewhere became part of their knowledge, but not the center of their experience. In this way, the magical world remains quiet and continuous, held together by structures that endure beyond individual events. Each school, each classroom, and each student becomes part of that ongoing rhythm, where learning continues without urgency. And as time moves forward, new generations arrive, step into familiar halls, and begin the same steady process, unaware of how many stories have already passed beyond the walls that surround them.